Chapter 1470. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. What's wrong with saving you? I don't like owing debts. You saved my life, so I'll repay you with my life. This is what I should do. Gu Nanli's joy was dampened by the cold water that she had just felt. He suddenly said fiercely, "Are you like this to everyone?" Wei Wei Bai was stunned, then looked away unnaturally. Her voice was hesitant, right? You have to pay back what you owe. It's the same no matter who you owe. These words were not just any ordinary heart-wrenching. She did not like him, but she wanted to repay her debts. Gu Nanli thought of the first time he saw her. She was also like this. She had said from the very beginning that whoever she owed could make her pay her debts. Many of the people who were about to leave the Bai clan stayed because of this sentence. A thought flashed through Gu Nanli's mind. If she owed him, she would not be able to pay it back. Would she also stay? The system yawned, holding the super beautiful wine glass it used to indulge in wine and women. It drank the cheapest, almost expired orange juice. Then it said to Wei Wei Bai, "Those cars were sent by the male lead. Your cheap brother is seriously injured. Without him, there is no way to organize an effective chase." After all, Gu Nanli's case was personally handled by Bai Mu. If he fell, who would dare to take his credit? Moreover, they did not have the ability to do so. They could only wait for him to be rescued or directly die before they could deal with Gu Nanli. Wei Wei Bai looked calm. "I know. Evolving from a steely straight man to a scheming boy is also considered an improvement." Gu Nanli lowered his eyes and stared at the road, deep in thought. The truck entered the port. Gu Nanli said, "There is a smuggling boat here. Let's get on the boat and leave." Wei Wei Bai immediately opened the door and cautiously looked out. She found only a lonely boat, emitting a dim light. This ship seemed to have been sent by Gu Nanli. Of course, she didn't show anything strange. She turned around and said to Gu Nanli, "There's no one else. Let's go." Gu Nanli nodded. When he opened the door, he suddenly groaned in pain and clutched his shoulder. Wei Wei Bai immediately asked worriedly, "What's wrong?" Gu Nanli immediately restrained himself. His face was a little pale. The youthful feeling of youth actually made others feel that he was abnormally weak. He said calmly, "I'm fine." But his voice still revealed his painful trembling. "Wei Wei Bai, why didn't I see you in so much pain when we were in bed? Keep pretending, keep pretending." She had long realized that Gu Nanli's pain tolerance was super awesome. The gunshot wound on his shoulder did not allow him to show any expression of pain. If she was in so much pain that she couldn't move, would he have pushed her onto the bed? It didn't matter if the blood splattered all over the bed. The innkeeper, on the morrow, would think that there had been a murder in his room. Didn't he still wake up in the middle of the night, treat his own wound, and get her a new set of clothes before waking her up? Moreover, when she woke up, he even fed her a can of unknown drink. Full stomach and refreshed spirit. She didn't know how this guy got it. He clearly didn't have a single subordinate by his side. And the system was even worse. When she was sleeping, it was also sleeping. Because it was surrounded by a bullet screen army, it would cover its head and sleep when it was sleepy. It only woke up when Wei Wei Bai woke up. If Gu Nanli wanted to strangle her in the middle of the night, the system would probably have to send her a funeral. Gu Nanli pretended for a while and realized that the other party really seemed to think that he was fine. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, /transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, / transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Download transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1471. Not good enough to act pitiful. He frowned and was about to make it more obvious. Just then, he heard the door of the passenger seat close with a bang. Gu Nonli, Wei Wei Bai got out of the car and didn't even look at him. When a woman was ruthless, there was nothing a man could do. For the first time, Gu Nonli felt a childish discomfort in his heart. He was a little angry and wanted to open the door. However, the door suddenly opened and he saw Wei Wei Bai standing outside the car. She raised her hand and looked worried. "Come down, I'll support you." Gu Nonli looked at her hand for a while and then his gaze fell on her worried face. Her beautiful eyes and suppressive aura softened and made her skin look even whiter. Gu Nonli stared blankly for a few seconds before reaching out to hold her hand. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his strange and complicated gaze. She held his wrist firmly with her fingers and held his arm with her other hand. She walked with him step by step. It was a strange experience for Gu Nonli to be supported by someone. After all, this was the posture of a weakling. But surprisingly, he didn't hate it at all. He hated weaklings the most. If it wasn't to make her feel good, he wouldn't have used such a stupid method to carry out his plan. When they reached the port, she carefully pulled him onto the boat and then turned to deal with the captain. Gu Nonli stood behind her and stared at her intently. As he watched, he realized that she was actually bargaining. She said, "Seeing that we're so good-looking, let's make it cheaper, big brother." The captain said, "Big sister, you're good-looking and your man is good-looking, but good-looking can't make a living." Gu Nonli, what kind of godly conversation is this? When he was at his lowest, he wouldn't bargain with people on a boat that was escaping for his life. Wei Wei Bai said, "Why not? I'm happy to see it, so I won't be hungry." The captain said, "Although that's true, we can't be stingy with money." Seeing that the bargaining was about to fail, Li Yundong thought. Wei Wei Bai tugged at Gu Nonli. "Who's missing your boat? Let's go to the next boat." Gu Nonli, who had never seen haggling in a wet market, was speechless. The boatman could only stretch out his hand to persuade them to stay. All right. We're about to set sail. I'll give you a discount." Wei Wei Bai gave Gu Nonli a sly and cute smile. This smile was another side of her that he had never seen before. Gu Nonli looked at her without blinking. If he had kept her locked up, she would not have shown him such an unguarded smile. This was the first time Gu Nonli felt so lucky. He wanted her to let down her guard. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. System, this is the tragic story of a person who tried to sell his pitiful strategy, but was countered by the host. The ship finally set sail before dawn. Wei Wei Bai brought hot water and a towel from the boatman. She soaked the towel in hot water and wrung it dry before wiping Gu Nonli's face. Gu Nonli sat there without daring to move. He didn't have any of his usual cleverness. Wei Wei Bai said, "Does it still hurt?" Gu Nonli shook his head, "It's fine." He leaned against the porthole. There were still stars in the sky as her hand softly stroked his face. He had never felt such a peaceful moment before. Even if they were escaping, he felt that as long as she was here, he would feel at ease. The beastly nature in his body was soothed by her. Gu Nonli's eyes also became gentle. He suddenly reached out to hug her and buried his head in her shoulder. The fragrance of her long hair floated to his nose. "Wei Wei, you like me. Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Transmigration system, male god, come here." Chapter 1472. It was a sincere sentence. He said it many times. Every time he said it, his mood was different. This time, it was more gentle. She could do whatever she wanted. If she really wanted to follow him, she wouldn't run around. He taught her, nurtured her, and was willing to be her guide. He was even her father who guided her spiritually. When the underworld's godfather taught their children, he also used this kind of wholehearted method. If she didn't run away, he was willing to give up his godfather's feelings and do his best to pave the way for her. As long as she loved him. Gu Nanli's breathing deepened, he even became a little nervous. Her face was pressed against his chest, she could hear his rapid heartbeat. In the cold wind, his skin was unbearably hot. Gu Nanli heard Wei Wei Bai suddenly say softly, "No." It was a very calm word. Even if it was a little hesitant, it still heavily shattered Gu Nanli's expectations. His body stiffened, the gentleness in his eyes turned into a cold chill. Sure enough, it still didn't work. Women were too hard to chase. Build a cage and lock her up, pamper her, and raise her until she became useless, she could only rely on him. If he didn't let her grow, if he didn't give her resources, even if she was an eagle, she would be raised into a delicate flower by him, unable to withstand the wind and rain. This way, even if she wanted to run away every day, she wouldn't be able to. Gu Nanli only had two plans in his mind. She fell in love with him, she wouldn't run away. He gave her everything to make her strong. She rejected him, didn't want to stay by his side, then he would lock her up until she became useless. Wei Wei Bai was tightly hugged by him, she couldn't see his expression, but she felt that the atmosphere was a little stagnant. She asked the system, "What's the situation now?" The system carefully drank the diluted orange juice. Not only did it dilute the orange juice it bought, it also diluted it when drinking it. The ratio was 9:1. The water was 9:1. This way, they could drink for a long time, until they reached the next plane. It said while licking the drink, "Oh, it feels like the male lead is scheming something, he doesn't look like a good person." That gloomy expression and sinister gaze were enough to scare a child to tears. It was a little confused. "Don't you want the heartwarming strategy? Why did you reject him?" Wei Wei Bai said, "He won't believe it until the time is right." She simply loved him to the point of death. Who would believe that? Even a ghost would not believe it. Gu Nanli was not a fool. He was just asking impulsively. If there was not a big twist, he would not believe that she could really fall in love with him. They didn't have the opportunity to fall in love. Wei Wei Bai was all too familiar with the rhythm of how to deepen love. Now was definitely not a good time to say that she loved him. Gu Nanli suddenly stroked her long, silky hair and said softly, "All right, I won't force you. You can leave when you're free." How magnanimous. Wei Wei Bai silently despised him. Acting, you scheming king, continue acting. Be careful of the splits. She could only play along with him. Her hands suddenly gripped his clothes tightly, and a trace of trembling flashed through her eyes. Gu Nanli's eyes flashed with a glimmer of hope, but she did not say anything and continued to stay in his arms silently. This bit of hope made him narrow his eyes. A dangerous light appeared in his eyes. Perhaps he had not done enough. She needed a bigger event to move her. Gu Nanli quietly hugged her, but his eyes coldly looked around. Then, a small black object that looked like a grain of rice appeared on his finger. After he pressed the item, he disappeared again. It was a distress communicator. Chapter 1473. After the signal was sent out, someone would come to rescue them within half an hour. Gu Nanli knew that half an hour should be enough. He touched Wei Wei Bai's hair and said softly, "I think there's something wrong with that crew member. I'll go and take a look." Wei Wei Bai didn't object. She left his arms and pulled out the knife. She said coldly, I'll go. Gu Nonli pressed her shoulder with one hand. I'm more experienced. If there's a trap, I'll call you. Wei Wei Bai looked up at him with a trace of obvious worry in her eyes. Then she looked away. Okay, go. Gu Nonli nodded and turned around. There was a gloomy smile on his face. There were 2 crew members on the ship, but they were both veterans. This was a complete smuggling ship. If they encountered someone tough, they would deliver the goods seriously. If they encountered someone weak, they would directly kill and rob them. They were all rotten to the core of society. After Gu Nonli walked out of the cabin, he saw the captain and the crew on the deck. The captain was a little embarrassed and immediately got up. I'm sorry, big brother, a gentle smile appeared on Gu Nonli's pretty face. No, I'm the one who's sorry. After saying that, he raised his hand and shot him cleanly. The gunshot seemed to have been silenced and was covered by the sound of the waves. The crew member reacted and was about to scream in horror when a bullet had already pierced his head. To Gu Nonli, dealing with the 2 of them was just a matter of raising her hand and retracting it in passing. After killing the people, he calmly looked at the direction of the waves and then looked at the weather. It wouldn't rain, and there shouldn't be high waves on the sea. This kind of weather was just right. Gu Nonli walked familiarly to the room where the crew kept the weapons. There was a box full of guns and miscellaneous weapons. Many of them were probably robbed after killing people. Gu Nonli didn't look at them more. These were no different from trash to him. He reached out and found a small bomb. This thing could squeeze out a large hole in the ship, but it wouldn't affect Bai Weiwei's side. He opened the packaging of the bomb and placed it on the floor of the boat. Then, he calmly took out a cigarette. It's a lady's cigarette. This was prepared for Wei Wei Bai. Back at the hotel, when he was looking for clothes for her, he had also taken the brand new cigarettes from the hotel counter. He didn't smoke, but he was willing to indulge her. She was not a heavy smoker and only smoked a stick once in a while. It would not cause any serious health problems for her. And Gu Nonli had to admit that the way she smoked in a languid and dazed manner, damn pretty and elegant. In fact, it was extremely tempting. Gu Nonli lit the cigarette. She hesitated for a moment before putting it to her lips and taking a puff. He had never smoked before. When it came to his own health, he had self-discipline to the point of morbidity. Before he met Wei Wei Bai, he had not even played with women, let alone cigarettes. Except for the wine, because of his insomnia. Gu Nonli felt suffocated. He couldn't help but cover his mouth and cough. He awkwardly threw the cigarette onto the cotton and ignited the bomb. Then, he coughed and walked out. This thing, she could actually look so good smoking it. How did she do it? The timing of the bomb was just right. He walked far away, and it suddenly exploded. The water poured into the cabin. Soon, the boat would sink. Gu Nonli sized himself up and felt that he was not miserable enough. He had to make it seem as if he was truly pitiful. He did not hesitate. He aimed the gun at his calf and found a good position to shoot. The bullet smoothly brushed past his calf. It was a scary wound, but it did not hurt the bones and meridians. It was basically a wound that would not be a big problem once the blood stopped. Gu Nonli laughed coldly. His eyes were deep and had a sinister light. At this moment, he was evil and exquisite. The coldness on his pale face made people shudder, but he was also flawlessly handsome. If you are still not tempted by this, I won't give you a chance. The cage was already prepared. It was surrounded by the sea on all sides. The castle was built on the cliff. He was just waiting to lock up a princess. If she was not tempted, he would turn into an evil dragon and lock her up. // Chapter 1474. Gu Nanli put away his gun, and then a pained expression appeared on his face. He was covered in blood as he held the only life buoy. He hurriedly rushed back. Wei Wei Bai had already sensed that something was wrong. She ran out of the cabin and was about to ask what was going on. Gu Nanli rushed over, covered in blood. He looked anxious. The crew wanted to kill me, so I killed them. But the bomb on the ship exploded. This ship is going to sink. After he finished speaking, he put the life buoy around her waist. When the ship sinks, you have to swim away immediately. Otherwise, you will be sucked into the whirlpool. He touched her face, his voice a little hoarse as he stared at her. Wei Wei Bai frowned. What about you? Gu Nanli paused. His legs were trembling, and more blood was gushing out. He twitched the corner of his mouth. My stamina is better than yours. I can escape. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Okay, I believe you can do it. I'll go into the water first. You have to catch up with me quickly. After she finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped off the ship and ran away with the life buoy. Gu Nanli, wait, didn't she see his injured leg? Didn't she see his pained expression? Did she really believe that he could swim by himself? Wasn't she afraid that he would drown? Gu Nanli stood alone on the sinking ship. He felt as if he had been struck by lightning. At least she should have hesitated so that he would have staggered and fallen. Let's see if she would save him. This way, he wouldn't be sure if she loved him and would immediately run away. Or did she like him in her heart but really believe that he was powerful? Gu Nanli hesitated for a moment and immediately took a cloth to bandage his wound. What a waste of a shot. Wei Wei Bai didn't notice at all. He saw the position and immediately jumped down. After Gu Nanli entered the water, the ship surged violently and caused a whirlpool. He had calculated his position and could easily escape, but his legs suddenly cramped. He was especially calm when it came to cramps in the water. He dived into the water and reached out to grab his cramping leg, massaging it along his meridians. As long as he did not panic, cramps in the water were not difficult for him to deal with. Only after his feet were massaged did he emerge from the water. The early morning sun had begun to shine on the surface of the water. He took a closer look. Where was Wei Wei Bai? Didn't he swim far away with a life buoy? That should be in front of him. Out of the corner of his eye, he suddenly saw a familiar figure swimming towards the huge whirlpool caused by the ship. Wasn't this courting death? If they were sucked into the whirlpool, they would lose their lives. When Gu Nanli saw Wei Wei Bai swimming into the whirlpool, he slapped the water fiercely. Wei Wei Bai, what are you doing? Amidst the noise, Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just heard his voice. She suddenly turned around and saw him. Then Gu Nanli saw a flash of ecstasy in her eyes, but in the next second, she was sucked into the whirlpool. Gu Nanli, he wanted to act pitiful to gain her favor. In the end, she seemed to be worse than him. He sighed helplessly and dove into the water. This time, he would probably have old injuries on his legs and shoulders when he went to the hospital this time. Chasing women was too troublesome. In the water, Gu Nanli saw Wei Wei Bai at the edge of the whirlpool. Her black hair curled and floated in the water. Her snow-white face was bloodless, like a sea demon in the water. She was lifeless and exquisite. Gu Nanli's heart tightened. He quickly swam to her side and hugged her. The sound of a helicopter came from the sky. When Gu Nanli heard the sound, he knew that it was his distress signal. //. Chapter 1475. Even with his strength, he couldn't break free from this huge whirlpool. He carried her out of the water, but in the next second, he was pressed back into the water by the oncoming water. The power of the whirlpool pulled them down. The next moment, a familiar voice shouted, "Goo, what are you doing? Fancy artistic swimming." After this voice, a rope ladder with a heavy object fell into the water. Goo Nonly immediately grabbed the rope ladder, and the ladder kept rising. It was like a moment of life and death, and the two of them were almost done for. Goo Nonly was pulled onto the helicopter by Cece's rescue team. The doctors on the helicopter immediately gave them first aid. Goo Nonly had many wounds, and after being soaked in seawater, it was a ghastly sight. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, had fainted because she choked on water. Seeing that the doctor was about to give Wei Wei Bai mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, Goo Nonly pushed the doctor away and almost pushed him off the helicopter. Then, he clasped Wei Wei Bai's face and gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. One of them was covered in blood, and his flesh was white. It was horrifying to look at. The other was unconscious and wet all over. Cece was speechless and wanted to bang her head against the wall. After saving Wei Wei Bai with great difficulty, he immediately pulled the simple curtain and changed her clothes. Cece, the doctor, and the rescue team all had their backs to the curtain, and they were all speechless. Especially the doctor, he felt that he was useless. After pulling the curtain open with great difficulty, Goo Nonly's indifferent face appeared. "Okay, she's fine. She just choked on water. Let her sleep for a while and give her a dose of nutrition injection." Cece was speechless for a while before he said helplessly, "Brother, can you tell me that you managed to get a woman after all this fuss?" This chasing of a woman was like a Hollywood battle. He had never seen it before. Goo Nonly was silent for a while before he reached out and rubbed his tired face. "I still have to test her. When I had cramps just now, she couldn't see me and directly swam into the whirlpool to save me. Does this mean she likes me? After all, she cherished her life so much. Furthermore, the speed at which she escaped was much faster than him. She swam headfirst into the whirlpool to save him." Cece was afraid of him and immediately said, "Not only do I like you, I even love you. If I didn't love you, how could I give you my life?" Goo Nonly stared blankly for a while. A trace of astonishment flashed through his dark eyes. He couldn't help pursing his lips into a strangely childish smile. "That's good. I didn't waste my efforts." After saying that, he suddenly fell down. Cece immediately reached out to hold him and found that his body was abnormally cold. Even his breathing had weakened. Cece's expression changed. He pulled the doctor over. "Quick, save him." When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she found herself lying in the hospital. This was a familiar hospital. She sighed and said, "Did Goo Nonly court his own death?" The feeling of being counterattacked was extremely satisfying. She didn't have to do anything. She just had to wait for Goo Nonly to act pretentiously. The system glanced at Goo Nonly's ward. "He's out of danger." The male lead was very lucky. No matter what he did, he wouldn't die. Wei Wei Bai nodded. "It's my turn to do it. He's worked hard." The system silently drank its orange juice. "You two are so pretentious. Forget about courting death." When Cece heard the nurse say that Wei Wei Bai had woken up, he immediately rushed out. He still had to perform the tragic and great deed of Goo Nonly dying. Tui, injuring himself into a vegetative state. Cece pushed open the door and entered. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed. Her delicate wrist was placed beside the bed. Under the needle, faint blue veins could be seen. The //. Chapter 1476. Her expression was indifferent as she looked up at him. "What happened to Goo Nonly?" Cici almost couldn't take it anymore under her sharp and clear gaze. They were both smart people and would be exposed if they weren't careful. Cici was still waiting for Gu Nonli to settle the girl and send him back to his house. He wanted to help settle the difficult eldest brother so that he could smoothly take over. He didn't have Gu Nonli's cleverness. It was difficult for him to do it alone. Cici's face showed a trace of grief. It's nothing, he's fine. The wounds on his shoulder and calf weren't fatal. It was just that they had been soaked in water for a long time and would need to be reconstructed. Wei Wei Bai looked at Cici coldly without saying a word. Suddenly, she grabbed the drip needle and threw it away. Blood seeped out from under the skin of her wrist. It was a ghastly sight. She walked out directly in a threatening manner. Cici hurriedly stopped her. Really, Gu Nonli is fine. He's fine. You still need to rest. You can't run and jump around like this. Wei Wei Bai grabbed Cici's collar and slammed him against the wall. Her eyes were red with boiling anger. Something happened to him, right? Was he not fished out from the sea? Is he dead? Cici felt that something was wrong with her cold gaze. He didn't dare to struggle and only said hesitantly, he was rescued. Wei Wei Bai shouted angrily, where is he? Take me there. She didn't believe that Gu Nonli had been rescued. The grief in her eyes was incomparably moving. Cici didn't dare to be too careless and said carefully, he was rescued, but he's in a vegetative state. I heard from the doctor that he hit his head when he fell into the water from the boat. But because he saw you being sucked into the whirlpool and tried his best to save you, he was hit in the head by a wooden plank. After he was rescued, he couldn't wake up. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and looked at him blankly. She seemed unable to understand what he was saying. Wei Wei Bai released his collar and said calmly, take me to see him. Cici looked at her expressionless face. Did she like him, or was she glad that Gu Nonli was dead and did not have to bother her? He didn't dare to get too involved in Gu Nonli's relationship. After all, an old man's first love was really deadly when he fell in love. Wei Wei Bai was led by Cici to the outside of the intensive care unit. She saw Gu Nonli, who was covered in bandages and had a ventilator on his face. He was quiet and pale, like a corpse. Wei Wei Bai gripped the glass with her fingers. Her voice was hoarse and trembling. Did I make him like this? Cici saw that she was on the verge of collapse and was in so much pain that she wanted to die. Only then did he realize that she was in so much pain that she had calmed down. He was a man with a strong heart, but when he heard her scolding him, his heart softened. Actually, it's not really for you, Wei Wei Bai interrupted him fiercely. I want to go in. Cici paused. Could she see that something was wrong? But when he saw Wei Wei Bai's bloodshot eyes, he could almost empathize with her. He called the nurse and asked Wei Wei Bai to disinfect the wound. When Wei Wei Bai rushed into the ward, Cici looked at the glass wall speechlessly. Wei Wei Bai reached out and held Gu Nonli's hand, trembling all over. It was as if she couldn't bear the fact that Gu Nonli couldn't wake up. Cici rubbed his temples with his hands. If you're found to be pretending, your first love is over, brother. Wei Wei Bai obviously liked Gu Nonli. He couldn't bear to lie to him when he was in so much pain. Cici glanced at Wei Wei Bai's back view, as if she couldn't bear the pain, and immediately turned to leave. If he continued to watch, he would change sides. // Chapter 1477. Wei Wei Bai held his hand tightly. The tears in her eyes finally couldn't hold back and kept falling. She put his hand in front of her eyes and wiped away her tears. Those warm tears made Gu Nonli feel fresh. His eyelashes trembled, but he still played the role of a vegetable. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She just held his hand motionlessly and stared at him. He didn't dare to move. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything, but her tears couldn't stop falling. Tears continued to fall from his fingers, and the warmth turned cold again. She didn't say a word, but his heart ached so much that he didn't know what to do. After some time, Cici finally remembered to eat. When he returned to the ward, Wei Wei Bai was still in the same position, holding Gu Nonli's hand tightly and never leaving. Cici frowned and asked someone to send some porridge that was easy to digest. Then he entered the ward and said to Wei Wei Bai, "Eat something. If you don't eat, you'll collapse." She had just returned from a disaster and was not in good health. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She didn't even pay attention to Cici. Cici was a little embarrassed, but he still tried to persuade her, "Eat something. Gu doesn't like you like this. He wants you to live happily." Wei Wei Bai's body trembled and she almost couldn't hold Gu Nonli's hand. Cici was a little helpless that he had to lie again. He said that if you want to leave, you can. He didn't feel guilty when he said this. In fact, the truth was that Wei Wei Bai really wanted to leave. He tied her up and locked her up on the island. This ghost was so sick that he couldn't bear to look at it. Wei Wei Bai finally turned to look at him. Her expression was pale and sad. "Can he still wake up?" Cici coughed lightly. "Yes, the doctor said that he needs the call of love. If we accompany him every day, say that we love him, and let him feel the warmth of this world, he might wake up." What the fuck is this? The level of shame was off the charts. Gu Nonli didn't even care about his old face anymore. How could he say such a thing? As expected, Wei Wei Bai was silent for 3 seconds. If it wasn't for the sadness in her eyes, he would have thought that she was about to laugh. Of course, everything was an illusion. She suddenly turned around and lowered her head to kiss his fingers. Then, she said in a hoarse voice, "Gu Nonli, I'll be your woman." This sentence was light and heavy, carrying a feeling that could not be ignored. Gu Nonli could barely control himself. His eyelids twitched. When Cici thought that he was going to be exposed, Wei Wei Bai suddenly collapsed. Gu Nonli jumped up from the bed in an instant. All the drips and breathing masks were ripped off by him with one hand. The sound of things being smashed could be heard from the ward. He had already supported Wei Wei Bai's collapsed body with one hand. Then, he sat up and took her into his arms. Wei Wei Bai had already fainted. She was so weak that it was like she was going to disappear. However, Gu Nonli's eyes were moist and his hands that were hugging her kept trembling. Her weak breathing sounded in his ears. That sentence made him so excited that he couldn't control himself. Gu Nonli never thought that he would be able to get the feeling he wanted. He was actually this excited. It was different from the feeling of weakness that he had experienced before. His heart kept beating faster and faster. So this was how the person he liked felt when she liked him. The joy after the joy made him a bit flustered. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. Cici couldn't help but say, "You're going to strangle her. She's very weak." Gu Nonli did not say anything. He was still holding her tightly. It was like she was a precious gift that he just received. He wanted to hold on to her and not let anyone take her away. Cici had nothing to say to his childish actions. "You got the confession. Can you stop being in a vegetative state?" Gu Nonli was silent for a bit before saying, "No, I still want to hear her say that she loves me every day and wants to be my woman. When I'm tired of hearing it, I'll wake up." "Cici." Gu Nonli kissed her hair and whispered in her ear, "I'm also your man. In the future, I will always be." Cici and the system, it was so painful to eat this pretentious Chinibu dog food. He actually had to eat it every day. It was simply inhumane. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here, /transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here, /. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 1478. When Wei Wei Bai woke up again, she saw that Gu Nonli was still lying upright. She put away her sad expression and began to take medicine and eat normally. Then she said, "Cici, is his career being suppressed now? Even if Bai Mu didn't pursue anymore, the secrets he leaked were real." Gu Nonli was still on the suspect list, and the police wouldn't let go of this big piece of meat. Cici was a little surprised. Some information was indeed leaked, and it also caused a competition between various forces. After all, Gu Nonli's territory was too tempting. Anyone who bit off a piece of meat would be able to eat their fill. Gu Nonli was busy chasing girls, and he tacitly agreed that the meat he threw out was a bargaining chip to chase Wei Wei Bai. They didn't think about fighting for it. As long as he was fine, a comeback was a matter of minutes. Wei Wei Bai nodded. She stuffed the porridge into her mouth and swallowed it expressionlessly. However, halfway through, she suddenly couldn't stand it and vomited everything. Her body couldn't stand the overly intense emotions. But she rinsed her mouth after vomiting and continued eating. Cici felt that this woman was really ruthless. She was the same kind of person as Gu Nonli. They were the kind of people who were inhumane when they were ruthless to themselves. Gu Nonli was also transferred from the intensive care unit to the VIP ward. Wei Wei Bai followed the doctors and nurses to take care of him. She washed his face, wiped his body, and trimmed his toenails seriously. Several times, Cici felt that Gu Nonli was also a ruthless person. He was tormented and touched by his own woman, but he could still stay in a lying state. Then, Wei Wei Bai began to take revenge on those enemies who fought for Gu Nonli's territory. Her methods were neat and cold. She even used her perfect weapon assembly technique to snatch a big deal from the enemy forces. She put away her nail polish and did not even wear makeup. She walked in and out of Gu Nonli's sphere of influence without makeup, maintaining the balance of his career after he became a vegetable. The territories that were originally thrown out by Cici and Gu Nonli as bargaining chips and had no intention of getting back were all taken back by Wei Wei Bai. Gu Nonli originally wanted her to come to his side every day and say that she loved him. In the end, Wei Wei Bai went out every day to work on her career. What happened to the call of love? By the time Wei Wei Bai returned from suppressing a hostile force, it was already late at night. Cici grumbled as he followed behind her. "You don't have to work so hard. You need to rest. Otherwise, you can just give Gu a loving hug every day. Your career isn't important." Wei Wei Bai came to the bedside. Her cold and beautiful face did not have a trace of soft expression. "Very important," she said softly and earnestly. She then lowered her head and used a cotton swab to wipe Gu Nonli's dry lips. It was only at this moment that her gaze became gentler. Wei Wei Bai said as she wiped his lips, "I can't let him wake up with nothing. To a man, his career is much more important than a woman." Cici was momentarily speechless. He then asked, "Do you think that Gu will think that his career is more important than you? Is that why you are working so hard to protect his territory?" Wei Wei Bai was silent. She wiped his lips until they were wet and then faintly hummed in agreement. Then she said, "I'm not a doctor. I don't know how to wake him up, but at least before he wakes up, I want to protect everything about him. I want to make sure that when he wakes up one day, he will still be the king of this world, and not a loser who can be trampled on by others." Gu Nonli's fingers trembled. Chapter 1479. 10,000 words of I love you can't compare to this one sentence. I want to protect everything about him. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 88. Wei Wei Bai reached out to stroke Gu Nonli's thick black hair as her voice softened. Whether you're awake or asleep, I will always be your arm. Little husky, rest well, I will make sure you have no worries. When she said this, even Cici was moved. Women had always been their accessory. When they were rich, women were like flowers that bloomed beside them. When they failed, they would blame their failure on the woman. After all, they never needed to fight, nor did they need to bear the consequences of losing a battle. But Wei Wei Bai was not a flower. When a man failed, she could help him bear the consequences of failure and even bring him back from the ashes. After Bai Weiwei finished speaking, she bent over and kissed his lips affectionately. Get better soon. I like you a lot. This was the call of love. When Weiwei Bai was about to leave, a hand suddenly pressed down on her hair and her lips were pressed onto his again. A lingering kiss made Weiwei Bai's eyes open wide. Gu Nonli's eyelashes trembled a few times before he finally opened his eyes. His eyes were a bit scattered, but there was a trace of joy in them. After he finished kissing her, he finally let her go and said in a soft voice, I heard it, you can't deny it. After saying this, he couldn't help smiling. He had a proud smile. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 90. Wei Wei Bai stared at him in a daze, as if she couldn't believe it. You're awake. Gu Nonli pretended to reluctantly raise his hand, wanting to hold her hand, but he couldn't do it after trying a few times. Wei Wei Bai grabbed his hand. This initiative made Gu Nonli narrow his eyes in satisfaction. He said softly, you said you like me, so I woke up. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a while. Suddenly, she blinked and the tears in her eyes fell onto his arm. It was as if the tears that she had been holding back for a long time fell, but she quickly wiped them away with her hands and then smiled as if nothing had happened. It's good that you're awake. I thought you would be in a vegetative state forever. Gu Nonli looked at her silently. His expression was complicated, but in the end, it was more of a warm joy. He sighed. Yes, I was woken up by you. His mental defenses were completely shattered. After walking on a dark path for so long, a light suddenly appeared. He was so scared that he didn't dare to look at it directly. At first, he could only lean on her to sleep, but now, she had become the pillar of support in his heart. The pain that Gu Buddha had inflicted upon him was slowly alleviated by her. Gu Nonli felt that life was as funny as a drama, and he was grateful for this funny thing that allowed her to appear in his life. The resentment that was deeply hidden in his heart dissipated little by little. When he first saw her, it would be a lie to say that he didn't hate her. It was only because he was used to holding it in that he suppressed it in his heart. Now, there was no more hate. Gu Nonli held her hand and kissed her fingertips. I'll help you apply nail polish in the future. He said softly. This man who was once like a wild beast full of murderous intent was actually so soft. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled a few times. Her smile deepened, and her voice was slightly choked. Okay. Cici felt that this scene was too glaring. He turned around and wiped the corners of his eyes. He didn't think that a person with a heart of stone like him would be moved. The system held the cup expressionlessly and snorted coldly. It's all fake. It had been through so many worlds, and it was no longer moved. Whoever was moved was an idiot. Chapter 1480. Gu Nonli was so moved by Wei Wei Bai's confession that he didn't even pretend to be in a vegetative state anymore. So he pretended to be disabled. When the doctor said, Mr. Gu's leg suffered a serious gunshot wound. Without long-term rehabilitation, he won't be able to stand up. I hope Miss Bai can give him encouragement of love and give him the courage to stand up. Cece stared at the doctor's lies, dumbfounded. How shameless must one be to say such words of encouragement of love? Moreover, his legs suffered a gunshot wound, but the wound was very controlled. The most troublesome part of the wound was that it had been soaked in seawater for too long. But to say that he couldn't stand up was bullshit. If he didn't take good care of it, it was possible that he would suffer from rheumatism and bone pain in the future. Disability was impossible. Gu Nanli was good at pretending. He reached out and touched his injured leg indifferently, then said calmly, "I didn't think that I would have a day like this." A faint sigh and sadness were suppressed deep in his eyes, making his calmness seem more desperate. Cece and the system laughed. "Ah. Yes, I didn't think that you would be so despicable one day." Wei Wei Bai frowned and suddenly reached out to hold his fingers, saying worriedly, "Don't worry, I'll help you with your rehabilitation training. I believe that you can stand up." Gu Nanli's eyes flashed with a glimmer of success, but he quickly covered it up. Instead, there was a layer of haggard gloominess. For a moment, he looked very pitiful. Wei Wei Bai hugged him and stroked his face as if she was petting a child. "It's okay, baby. Even if you're crippled, I won't leave you behind." Gu Nanli didn't want more than this. Her exposed feelings and confession soothed the dark insecurities in his heart time and time again. He didn't think that one day, he would like such an obvious and passionate expression of her feelings. Gu Nanli sighed faintly, "I only have you left." Wei Wei Bai's expression turned gentle. Her strong and sharp side melted into water. She was so beautiful that it made people gasp in admiration. Cece really wanted to shout, "Fake, don't believe it." He felt as if he was watching a pretty girl being cheated away by the underworld, and he actually felt guilty. For the next half a month, Wei Wei Bai dealt with the enemy forces while helping Gu Nanli rebuild. Gu Nanli often fell in various ways to win her sympathy. Just as they were getting along happily with each other, their favorability towards each other tenaciously and slowly increased. Half a month later, it increased to 93 favorability points. As for Gu Nanli, he was addicted to pretending to be a disabled person and had no intention of pulling himself together. In the end, even Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand it anymore. "Why don't I hire an assassin to shoot him in the legs and cripple him for real?" Since he was so good at acting, she really wanted to flatten him into a container and let him act as much as he wanted. The system sighed, "Sigh, calm down. If you're already impatient now, what if you want to spend the rest of your life with him?" Wei Wei Bai said, "What do you mean by spend the rest of your life with him? Once the strategy is done, let's go." Who would spend the rest of their life with him? The strategy targets were all fucking difficult to deal with. Their personalities were all problematic. If it wasn't for the favorability points, for the life points, and for living, who would spend the rest of their lives with these crazy people? After completing the side mission and the strategy, she had a lot of free time left. It was not good to play freely. Looking at Gu Nanli every day, she would feel like she was looking at missions every day. So after completing the mission, she would break up with Gu Nanli and say goodbye. The system was silent for a long time. It really wanted to say something, but felt that there was nothing to say. The is at https://m sashu com/comma. Chapter 1481. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life with him. The host had never seen the ability of a real lucky person. In this plane, no matter where she escaped, she couldn't escape from Gu Nanli. Even it couldn't help her avoid Gu Nanli. What a miserable life. The system pretended to wipe a few drops of crocodile tears and continued to drink the orange juice. It hoped that its orange juice could last a lifetime. Otherwise, it really didn't have any other snacks. Gu Nanli stayed in the hospital for half a month. He felt that if this continued, he would be exposed. After all, Wei Wei Bai had been asking the doctor for detailed medical records. The doctor had made several versions of the medical records. Although he could fool Wei Wei Bai for a while. But who knew when they would notice that something was wrong? So Gu Nanli was directly discharged from the hospital and sat in a wheelchair. In this half a month, Wei Wei Bai didn't really leave his side except to deal with some important matters. She asked about his well-being, massaged him, held his hand, and patiently let him walk forward step by step. Sometimes, when he saw how tired she was, his heart ached. But those unloved childhood times were gradually made up for by her patient companionship during this period of time. He had never been so clear about what he wanted. It wasn't the excitement of meeting an opponent. It wasn't the law of the jungle, the arrogance of the strong being king. Instead, he truly enjoyed the kind of satisfaction that only the weak could enjoy. Gu Nanli was paralyzed in the wheelchair. He was wearing a phone earpiece and was contacting his subordinates. Bai Mu is actually not dead. He repeated indifferently, but he wasn't too angry. Then he said calmly, then send assassins to assassinate him. 1 is not enough. Send 10. I can still afford this bit of hiring fee. If it wasn't for Wei Wei Bai, he didn't want to take Bai Mu's life. After all, after Bai Qi died, he and Bai Mu were the only biological brothers left in this world. He was cold-blooded by nature and wouldn't deliberately find trouble with his family. However, this relative of his was too inconsiderate. He had no choice but to hack him to death. When Gu Nanli thought of Wei Wei Bai's past, his eyes turned cold. She would not find out. Neither would they find out how Gu Buddha had died back then. Bai Qi had killed him. However, when Gu Buddha wanted to murder Wei Wei Bai and her daughter, he was the one who leaked the crucial information. He was young and looked especially innocent and harmless when he was young. No one saw the killing intent in his eyes. He hated the Gu family so much that he wanted to perish together with them. Even when he heard that his own mother had been killed by Gu Buddha, he didn't feel anything at all. No, there were ripples. It was resentment. Resentment for why they hadn't realized after so many years that he was their real child. He doted on Wei Wei Bai like a treasure. However, he had turned into trash in the swamp. His body was covered in dark scars as he struggled to climb up from the bottom. After crawling for so long, he finally saw the light of dawn. And this light was actually given to him by the child he hated. The balcony door suddenly opened. The coldness and murderous intent in Gu Nanli's eyes disappeared instantly. He looked up. He saw Wei Wei Bai holding a bowl of tonic medicine. She looked at him disapprovingly and said, "Why are you standing on the balcony? What if your wound hurts again? Drink the medicine first to nourish your body." She carefully picked up the spoon and sat by the side to feed him mouthful by mouthful. Gu Nanli also acted like he was paralyzed. He opened his mouth and drank, without any of the dignity of a strong person. Chapter 1482. It was as if overnight, he had turned from a perverted murderer into a mentally retarded baby that needed to be coaxed. After drinking the medicine, she pushed him into the room. Then, she found a small pair of scissors and cut his nails. When she lowered her head and cut his nails gently, her posture was indescribably gentle and beautiful. Gu Nanli's eyes were greedy for this beauty. He gently placed his hand on her thin shoulder. His fingers touched her round shoulder and felt the warmth of her body. Gu Nanli suddenly said softly, "That's good too." It was good that he had fallen into the underworld. If they had not exchanged, she might not have grown into the girl he liked. Fortunately, she did not have his experience, so her heart was softer and easier to fool than him. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. "What's wrong?" Gu Nonli shook his head and looked for an opportunity to hold her hand. He saw the white nails on it. Why don't you apply nail polish? Wei Wei Bai said casually, you're a patient. How can I use nail polish to take care of you? Gu Nonli's fingers paused, as if he was a little surprised by her answer. Wei Wei Bai smiled naturally. When you're better, you'll apply it for me personally. Gu Nonli did not know why, but when he saw her bright smile, his eyes became bitter. His smile was a little forced. Okay, wait for me to get better. He had never been treated so gently and attentively. He actually wanted to maintain it greedily. But when he saw the shadow of fatigue under her eyes, he suddenly felt that his heart was very vicious. Wei Wei Bai finished trimming his nails and washed his hands. Then, she took out the documents that needed to be dealt with. These are difficult to deal with. Take a look yourself. Gu Nonli opened it leisurely and took the fountain pen. Then, he smiled. The forces in this territory are very complicated. You need to get through these connections. It's useless to just snatch them back. You also need to get the pass from the forces above. His voice was very clear, and he spoke at a moderate pace. He told her everything she should pay attention to. Bai Weiwei leaned against him, extremely well-behaved. The sun gradually rose, and the warm sunlight spread all over the ground. Gu Nonli suddenly felt that he should find some time to stand up. He wanted to be like this forever. Happiness once again welled up in his heart, unfamiliar and lasting. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. Her favorable impression of him was at 95, but Wei Wei Bai was in a difficult situation. She had almost forgotten about the side mission. Wei Wei Bai asked again, Bai Qi doesn't have hundreds of illegitimate children, does he? The system glanced at the notification and realized that it could speak now. No, just Bai Mu. Wei Wei Bai said, are you sure? You said that Bai Qi didn't cheat on you. The system said, he really didn't cheat. He had Bai Mu by accident before he got married, and he never cheated after he got married. Something flashed through Wei Wei Bai's mind. So many things had happened recently that he had forgotten to sort out his relationship with Gu Nonli. What did he say in the beginning? Bai Qi and his wife did not cheat on him. But she was not related to Gu Nonli by blood. Gu Nonli was related to Bai Mu by blood. Wei Wei Bai thought about it, and suddenly asked curiously, am I adopted? Even if he didn't cheat, he could still be adopted. The system said, maybe, who knows? This answer was very high-end. She couldn't tell if it was true or not. Wei Wei Bai tried to say, there are two possibilities, I'll guess with whether I'm adopted or not. Download the at https://m.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click Save at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1483. When the favorability reaches 100, the side mission must be completed together. Otherwise, she would be paralyzed for the rest of her life. Just the thought of such torture made her tremble. That old thief, the main system, was too evil. The system became pessimistic. Every side mission requires guessing. It's impossible to guess correctly every time. Wei Wei Bai touched Tongzi's head. If I'm adopted, then Gu Nonli's identity is like this. When he was born, Bai Qi was chased by his enemies and accidentally threw him away. Later on, he adopted me as his own to fulfill his wish of missing his biological son. The system said, no. Wei Wei Bai nodded, then if I'm not adopted, but I'm not related to anyone in the Bai family, then Gu Nonli and I might have been swapped. The system said, no. It was not swapped, it was swapped maliciously. If her guess was not deep enough, she would not be able to complete the mission. Wei Wei Bai frowned and pondered. All kinds of possibilities ran through her mind. It was too difficult to just guess. After all, it did not say how much detailed information was needed to complete the mission. If she did not grasp this well, she would be paralyzed for life. If it was not swapped, then it was. Suddenly, a servant knocked on the door and asked softly, "Miss Bai?" Wei Wei Bai woke up from her guess and her expression turned cold. "What's the matter?" It was rare for Gu Nonli to be pushed out by Cici. It seemed that Gu Nonli's birthday was coming soon. Cici took the initiative to give him a grand birthday party and insisted that Gu Nonli accompany him to look at the cake design. The servant said, "You're on the phone." Wei Wei Bai had been helping Gu Nonli with his affairs recently and also paid attention to the fate of the Bai family who were locked up. She found that everyone was doing well in prison, so she did not continue to investigate. She took the phone. It was Bai Mu. "Wei Wei." Bai Mu's voice was hoarse and weak. It seemed that he had not yet recovered from the gunshot wound. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "What? What else do you want to threaten me with?" "Big brother." The word brother was spoken rather maliciously. After an indeterminate period of time, Bai Mu smiled bitterly. "You don't need to call me big brother. You might not believe what I'm about to say, but I'll tell you anyway." Wei Wei Bai said, "Stop nagging, I'm hanging up." Bai Mu's voice grew anxious. "You're Gu Buddha's daughter." Wei Wei Bai was stunned and her mouth twitched. She was Gu Buddha's daughter. Gu Nonli was Bai Chi's son. Wait a minute, didn't they say that they were mistaken? Then, how did they exchange their identities? Bai Chi was afraid that she would not believe him. "When you were hospitalized, I took your blood for a test. When I woke up a few days ago, I saw the report and found that you are not related to me by blood." Bai Mu heaved a sigh of relief. "Yes, we're not siblings, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai said, "Even if we're not siblings, how do you know that I'm Gu Buddha's daughter?" Bai Mu said, "Gu Buddha was caught a few times. Although he was only locked up for a short period of time, some of his information was left behind. His fingernails and hair were saved in the database. I checked it and found that you're 99% related." He said, "I suspect that you and Gu Nonli were swapped by Gu Buddha back then. When Bai Chi was being hunted down, the person beside Bai Chi's wife was Gu Buddha. Gu Buddha also had a pregnant wife. You couldn't have been swapped, because the genders are different. When there were only 2 children, it was impossible for the 2 genders to be swapped." Wei Wei Bai's face was calm. She complained to the system, "After talking for so long, you're just talking about the old joke of swapping a leopard cat for a prince. No matter how trash the system is, it's still a high-end artificial intelligence. It can't use such a simple and stupid joke." She had actually thought about swapping a leopard cat for a prince. But it was too melodramatic and cliché. She didn't think it was possible, so she didn't think too much about it. Gu Nonli's background might have a scarier, deeper, and more profound secret waiting for her to find out. Congratulations, host, for completing the mystery of swapping a leopard cat for a prince. It was a simple and clear sentence without any pause. Wei Wei Bai fell silent. "Main system, you shameless old thing. You're so bad that I can't even look at it anymore. How can you use such a melodramatic old trick? Are you worthy of being a high-intelligence artificial intelligence?" Bai Mu was still talking about his speculations. Wei Wei Bai quietly hung up the phone. She finally completed this annoying side mission. She heard movement and looked up at the door. She saw Gu Nonli pushing his wheelchair in. Gu Nonli saw her burning gaze on him, and his eyes couldn't help but curve. After the dark aura was retracted, his delicate and harmless appearance made people feel youthful. "What's wrong?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while, then smiled. "Nothing, I just miss you." Gu Nonli was stunned. he couldn't help but smile even wider. Wei Wei Bai was also smiling. That was great. She could freely say goodbye to him after brushing up on him. // Chapter 1484. Just like that, the days passed unhurriedly without any disturbances. Wei Wei Bai and Gu Nonli's life was sweet and peaceful. Gu Nonli's birthday was coming, and Cici made it very grand for him. Gu Nonli didn't refuse. A birthday party was a good gathering for all the forces to communicate. The news of his disability had already spread throughout the underworld. But even if his legs were disabled, his image didn't fall much because Gu Nonli didn't rely on fighting and killing to form his power. He was powerful because of his snake-like brain, not because of his skills. On the day of the party, Cici flipped through a pile of documents. There were many guests, so strict checks were needed to prevent bad enemies from sneaking in. Gu Nonli leisurely ran to the place where Wei Wei Bai was changing and waited. There were maids helping. He sat in the wheelchair, his fingers supporting his cheeks casually, smiling as he watched Wei Wei Bai put on a beautiful long dress. Her back was facing him, and there were many ribbons behind her. The maid squatted down and tied beautiful knots for her. Gu Nonli slowly came behind her and waved his hand to ask the maid to leave. Then he lowered his head and seriously tied the rest of the ribbons. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have noticed him. She turned slightly, and her beautiful side profile was still stunning under the light. Gu Nonli said softly, "Done tying. Women's things are so troublesome." He wore a suit and at most a tie and cufflinks. But she had a few maids to help her get dressed, so she needed more time than him. Wei Wei Bai glared at him unhappily. "Troublesome. Don't be a woman if you have the guts." Gu Nonli immediately reached out and hugged her waist, leaning his face against her back. Okay, don't be angry. It's all my fault. I'll help you paint your nails." His words were full of smiles. He was so easygoing and gentle that those who knew him felt that he was possessed by something. Wei Wei Bai didn't blame him. She turned around and sat down. Her dress spun around beautifully. Then, she stretched out her incomparably white fingers, her posture casual and arrogant. "Then I'll have to trouble you, baby." Gu Nonli was very tolerant of the fact that she was always talking about her precious husky. He even felt that it was very intimate. The husky she had bought was raised by Bai Mu. Later on, when the Bai family was arrested and imprisoned, that husky relied on the Bai family's kitchen to survive and didn't starve to death. When Wei Wei Bai went to the Bai family, she brought it back and let it jump around again. She liked the dog very much and often bathed it. She thought of the silly dog scratching the sofa outside. Gu Nonli's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. He was going to make it into a hot pot someday. Holding Wei Wei Bai's hand, he skillfully painted her nails. The beautiful light pink nail polish was the color of cherry blossoms. Gu Nonli also began to recognize a bunch of nail polishes of similar colors. Now, he could even count dozens of cosmetics and skincare products on Wei Wei Bai's dressing table. Although he still couldn't understand why her face was fine with so many things applied to it. She looked the best without makeup. Of course, she also looked good when she wore lipstick. Especially when he kissed her. A hint of twisted greed appeared in Gu Nonli's eyes. He enjoyed the warmth of this moment, so he silently suppressed his dark possessiveness. He wanted to let her fly and let her be happy. Just like how she was making him so happy now. Cici came over and saw his brother looking at Wei Wei Bai like a fawning dog. Chapter 1485. On the other hand, Wei Wei Bai looked indifferent. She looked at Gu Nonli with an indescribable calmness. Cici blinked and found that Wei Wei Bai's eyes had become unusually gentle. He was probably mistaken about the calmness just now. Cece didn't think much of it and said to Gu Nonly, "Birthday boy, you have to go out and deal with the guests." Gu Nonly held Wei Wei Bai's hand and kissed the back of her hand. "I'll go first. I'll wait for you." Wei Wei Bai raised her hand to touch his chin and kissed his lips. Then her lips moved slightly and she said in a low voice, "I'll give you the present later." "Happy birthday." Gu Nonly's eyes moved. He leaned back in his wheelchair happily and said, "Okay, I'll wait for you." Then he pushed the wheelchair out. Cece came over to help push it. When they were out of the room and far enough away, Cece finally couldn't help but ask, "What do you mean by recover?" Gu Nonly returned to his usual cold self after leaving the room. He reached out his finger and touched his lips. After a long silence, he said, "These 2 days. After all, I've endured for long enough." Although he could get her pity and love when he was a cripple, but he couldn't take her to bed. It was too unbearable. Gu Nonly felt that his self-control was not enough in front of Wei Wei Bai. Cece felt that Gu Nonly's tone was like a big bad wolf. But he was used to his personality. Anyway, from the first day he met him, he knew that this guy was bad. He just didn't expect that he could be so despicable when chasing a girl. If Wei Wei Bai knew that he had used so many tricks, she would probably have the heart to kill him. Of course, Cece saw Gu Nonly as a brother, so he could only let Wei Wei Bai down and bury these tricks. Let them be happy for a lifetime. The birthday banquet was very grand. When the banquet started, Gu Nonly went up to propose a toast and then said the opening lines. Everyone applauded enthusiastically. Although the birthday party couldn't come up with anything new. However, it was still useful for communicating with the various powers. It was just that many things were very cumbersome, and Gu Nonly was not willing to tire Wei Wei Bai out. When they were cutting the cake, Wei Wei Bai slowly came down the stairs. Gu Nonly threw the knife into Cece's arms and pushed his wheelchair to the bottom of the stairs. He looked up and saw her slowly walking down the stairs. Her skirt was flowing elegantly, and her short hair had already grown to her shoulders. Her slightly curly hair fluttered in the wind. When Wei Wei Bai came down from upstairs, Gu Nonly was already holding her fingers. Then, he turned to the side and said to everyone, "My wife, Wei Wei Bai." Everyone at the scene was in an uproar as they looked at Wei Wei Bai. Those who had thought that Wei Wei Bai was just Gu Nonly's mistress looked at Wei Wei Bai strangely. But when they thought about how Wei Wei Bai had personally come out to stabilize the situation when Gu Nonly was lying in the hospital, they thought about it. This kind of ability was indeed worthy of Gu Nonly. Coincidentally, when the music started to play, Cece specially invited a small symphony orchestra for this banquet. Gu Nonly held Wei Wei Bai's hand tightly. "May I have the honor to dance with you?" Wei Wei Bai held his fingers back. "Of course, it's my honor." Gu Nonly had not danced with anyone for so many years. At every banquet, he was very cold and restrained, rarely participating in double activities. So when Wei Wei Bai held his hand and the two of them walked to the middle of the living room in a wheelchair, one of them stood and one of them sat in a wheelchair. Chapter 1486. The guests couldn't help but take a few more glances. The two of them were like natural luminaries. Whether it was their appearance or aura, they complemented each other. In the music, Gu Nonly slowly moved his wheelchair, and Wei Wei Bai slowly matched his rhythm. In the rhythm of the music, the two of them had a surprisingly good rhythm. They were calm and elegant. Wei Wei Bai moved unhurriedly and complained softly, "When did we get married, wife?" When he said this, Gu Nonly didn't even frown when he was lying. Gu Nonly grabbed her fingertips and pulled her naturally. His wrist was very strong. Bai Wei Wei was wearing high heels. She staggered for a moment, and her whole body was pulled over by him. Gu Nonli changed his direction and hugged her. Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to sit on his lap. Gu Nonli also pushed the wheelchair, and the two of them sat in the wheelchair. He smiled. Then I'll propose now. Are you willing to marry me, Wei Wei? Wei Wei Bai hesitated. Gu Nonli said calmly, if you don't agree, I won't let go. You can only sit in the wheelchair for the whole night. The two of them sat in the wheelchair together for everyone to see. Wei Wei Bai, you're a rascal. Gu Nonli, that's too modest. I'm more than just a rascal. With that said, he touched her finger. A simple but beautiful ring with a smooth design had been put on her ring finger. After Gu Nonli put the ring on, he held her hand tightly. Okay, now that the proposal is over, let's hurry into the wedding hall. Wei Wei Bai wanted to withdraw her hand, but Gu Nonli refused to let go. From the looks of it, he wouldn't give up until he got what he wanted. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but mutter, you're practically stealing the bride. Gu Nonli's tone deepened. If I really wanted to steal the bride, I wouldn't be so gentle. Wei Wei Bai struggled to break free from his hand and stood up from the wheelchair. She then smoothed out her skirt and said, you're still so childish at your age. I'll go upstairs first. When you're done with your business, remember to come back to your room. I'll give you a birthday present. After that, Wei Wei Bai turned around and walked upstairs. Gu Nonli could not help but confirm, so my proposal was successful. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused. She placed one hand on the armrest and turned around with a bright smile. Her bright eyes, white teeth, and red lips were like fire. Yes, Mr. Gu, you've succeeded. After that, she smiled and walked upstairs. Soon, her figure disappeared around the corner of the stairs. Gu Nonli stared blankly at the spot where she had disappeared for a few seconds before he suddenly realized that his palms were sweaty. Gu Nonli slowly let out a sigh of relief. He was so nervous just now. He could no longer suppress the joy in his heart from the proposal being successful. He really wanted to get up from the wheelchair and run upstairs to hug Wei Wei Bai. The satisfaction of getting what he wanted was different from any other successful project in the past. If something was successful, he would at most feel a little better. But if the proposal was successful, he would feel real happiness. He never thought that one day he would be able to use the word happiness to describe himself. Gu Nonli's calm expression could not help but soften. He pursed his lips into a smile. He suddenly felt that this year's birthday was the most successful birthday party in his life. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 97. When Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of favorability, she had already started to pick out her clothes. The system asked, are you going to sleep? Are you choosing your pajamas? It was rare for Wei Wei Bai to want to sleep so early. Wei Wei Bai picked up a black dress. This one is leaking. /to txt. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Save button below to record this reading. Where's system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1487. The system couldn't help but say, if you wear this kind of pajamas, I'll be blocked immediately. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Then I'll wear this. The system looked at the dress in her hand. No matter how it looked at it, it looked like something sexy. What are you doing? Wei Wei Bai began to untie the ribbon behind her dress. Sleeping. The system felt that the host was hinting at something when she said the word sleep. Then it saw an army of bullet comments surrounding it. The system was very calm. After all, the host was just changing clothes, and the indifference would quickly disappear. But this wait seemed to have lasted for a long time. Did the host need a whole night to change clothes? As the host of the banquet, although Gu Nonli tried his best to shorten the time, it was already late at night by the time he sent all the guests away. He thought of Wei Wei Bai's gift and immediately pushed his wheelchair to the stairs. Because he was in a hurry, he was too lazy to pretend. He directly got off the wheelchair and ran up the stairs with it. Then he sat on the wheelchair again on the second floor and pretended to be a disabled person to the front of the room. He reached out and pushed the door open. In fact, he didn't expect anything. After all, it was late at night and she was probably asleep. The gift would probably be on the table. Wei Wei Bai casually threw her lipstick to him as a gift, and Gu Nonli felt that it was not bad. After he opened the door, he felt a cool breeze. The balcony's floor-to-ceiling windows were open. The moonlight shone in, and the floor was bathed in white moonlight. Gu Nonli leaned against Bai Weiwei on the balcony. She slowly turned her head. Her red mole was gorgeous, and the moonlight shone on her body. Her close-fitting black backless dress, with her movements, revealed her beautiful figure. Gu Nonli's pupils shrank. He didn't expect to see this. This dress was more stimulating than not wearing it. Wei Wei Bai held a cigarette in her hand and looked at him lazily. "Mr. Gu, do you like it?" She slowly straightened her body. The dress was like a second layer of skin. Under her round shoulders and delicate collarbones was a horizontal black collar. The contrast between black and white was breathtaking. This kind of clothing could almost be considered a sexy black outfit. The balcony was relatively dark. When Bai Weiwei walked in step by step from the balcony, under the light. Only then did Gu Nonli see clearly that she was wearing black fishnet stockings. This was simply driving a man crazy. Gu Nonli gripped the armrest of his wheelchair so hard that the veins on the back of his hand bulged. Wei Wei Bai finally walked in front of him and bent over lazily. Her beautiful skin was even more eye-catching in his eyes. She said indifferently, "Are you satisfied with what you see?" Gu Nonli suddenly reached out and snatched the cigarette from her hand. "Don't smoke this thing." He could tolerate cosmetics, but not smoking. "This thing is really bad for the body." Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then, she saw Gu Nonli put out the cigarette on the table. A living person like her was tempting him. He had a bone to pick with the pipe. Was there something wrong with this guy's brain? There was nothing wrong with Gu Nonli. That's the big problem. Just one look at Wei Wei Bai and his body was so hot that it was about to explode. Her current state was already beyond his tolerance. But he was pretending to be disabled now. If he recovered immediately. It would be strange if Wei Wei Bai didn't suspect anything. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai's hand slowly touched his thigh. Her voice was incomparably calm. "Mr. Gu, may I have the honor to invite you for a dance?" Gu Nonli's mind was blank. His words were a little slow. "What dance?" Wei Wei Bai suddenly sat on his thigh. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. She slowly blew a breath of warm air on his neck. "You can have whatever dance you want. After all, this is a gift for you." Wei Wei Bai's anger made him completely lose his mind. How could someone be so good at seducing men? She was a 10,000-year-old vixen and a damned nine-tailed fox. The kind that brought disaster to the country the moment she was born. Gu Nonli suddenly grabbed her waist and stood up directly to walk to the bed. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at him. Her eyes were a little wide, and the seductive look just now was gone. Gu Nonli's mood improved. He didn't feel guilty at all for lying. He kissed her. "You think that I can't stand up, so you're planning to suffocate me to death, right?" She was dressed like this and sat on him so boldly. She even gave herself to him as a gift. Wasn't it because she knew that he couldn't stand up and couldn't do whatever he wanted to her? Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. "You're not disabled. Gu Nanli pressed her onto the bed and held her face. If you like my disabled appearance, I'll continue to be disabled for you to see tomorrow. Now take pity on me and let me consummate our marriage first, okay? Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely for a while. She suddenly realized and pushed him fiercely. Gu Nanli, you shameless scoundrel. You're obviously not disabled, but you're lying to me. Gu Nanli took the opportunity to kiss her and refused to let go. I'm really disabled. You're making me stand up miraculously because of your love. Wei Wei Bai flew into a rage out of humiliation. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? Gu Nanli took the opportunity to pull the blanket over and trapped the two of them. He clasped her hand. His forehead was covered in sweat and it slid down his handsome face. He kissed her gently. Thank you. I like this gift very much. Wei Wei Bai's face turned red. The two of them were clearly people who would tremble in the underworld with a stomp of their feet, but at this moment, they were looking at each other like two big children. Then slowly, Gu Nanli hugged her. And the favorability also increased. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 99, / QQ, blog, WeChat, etc. Chapter 1488. In the endless darkness, there was a place that was warm and bright. No matter how many nightmares were chasing after him, he still ran forward with all his might. It was not like before, where he could not resist at all. Just as those terrifying dark shadows were about to catch up to him, he fell. Just as he thought he was going to fall into the swamp again, a warm hand held his hand, pulling him out of the endless darkness. He looked up and saw a familiar figure pulling him along as they ran forward. The swamp was gone, the maze was gone, the darkness was gone, the pain and nightmares were all far away. His weak and small body had also grown up. He was strong and fearless, and the shadow of incomparable weakness in his heart had been dispelled by her. Gu Nanli looked at the person pulling him towards the light and gently called out, Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai turned around and revealed a cute smile to him, Mr. Gu, good night. A simple good night, letting him know that he would not suffer from any nightmares in the future. Gu Nanli couldn't help but whisper back, good night. Then he woke up, his eyes incomparably bright. Wei Wei Bai was still in his arms, sleeping peacefully. The sun was shining outside the window. He couldn't help but call her a few times in her ear. Wei Wei Bai frowned, as if she was dissatisfied that her sleep was disturbed. She half opened her eyes and complained, what's wrong? Are you being chased again? Gu Nanli kissed her eyes and whispered with a smile, it's nothing, you can continue sleeping. I just want to call you and let you feel my joy. Wei Wei Bai was tired to death. She was too lazy to care about this crazy person, so she closed her eyes and continued to sleep. While she was asleep, a prompt sounded from the affection level. Ding, the male lead's affection is at 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission. Leaving countdown. None. 30 minutes. None, manually leaving the world failed. If the male lead does not leave, the host cannot leave. Wei Wei Bai did not hear any of this. Behind the bullet screen army, when the system heard the favorability level of 100, it manually activated the function to leave. Of course, he failed. The system looked at the data that couldn't be left with a cold expression. Applying for a lifetime was just a joke. It was impossible for them to succeed. After all, their levels were not high enough. But under Yi Yuxuan's ferocious and terrifying wish, the impossible request still succeeded. As for applying for a lifetime strategy, the initiative should be in the hands of the host. Generally speaking, if the host wanted to stay in the plane for the rest of his life, it was fine. But if she wanted to leave early, it would be even better. There was a choice. Only Wei Wei Bai's application did not give her the option to leave. Motherfucker, Yi Yuxuan, that bastard. Even if she died, she still wanted to keep Wei Wei Bai by her side for the rest of her life. Even in this plane, his terrifying wish was like an earthbound spirit that could affect Wei Wei Bai's fate. He had robbed too much of his HP. Now he could affect Wei Wei Bai's fate even more. The system glanced at the fate roulette and saw the slight traces left by Yi Yuxuan. Even if it was just a little, it was enough to shock the system. The system looked at the emotion blocker with a bitter expression. This thing, it did not know if it could persist for a lifetime to remove Wei Wei Bai's emotions. It was afraid that if it wasted too much time, it would go on strike. Please don't go on strike. The system took out the repair box and guarded beside the emotion blocker. As long as a trace of Wei Wei Bai's emotions leaked out, it would capture it and stuff it back in. / Chapter 1489. Host, you have to work hard. Men are not good people. Don't get too emotional. Otherwise, it would die of exhaustion. Before it died of exhaustion, it would drink a mouthful of orange juice to calm down. Wei Wei Bai was also exhausted. She was so tired that she couldn't even lift her limbs. Her skin was covered in the marks left by Gu Nanli. Those mottled marks would not fade for a few days. Gu Nanli, on the other hand, was very energetic. He continued to sit in the wheelchair. When she saw him shamelessly pushing the wheelchair beside her and asking her to get up for dinner, Wei Wei Bai was furious. She lifted her leg and kicked his wheelchair away. Because it had wheels, the wheelchair slid a short distance away. She didn't have enough strength to kick it far. Gu Nanli wasn't angry. Instead, he looked down at her feet that were sticking out from under the blanket. There were traces of him strangling her fair ankles. When she wanted to crawl away, he reached out and grabbed her ankles to drag her back. Gu Nanli's eyes darkened. He couldn't help but touch his lips as if he was thinking about something. Wei Wei Bai quickly retracted her legs and covered herself with the blanket. Get lost. Gu Nanli was afraid that he couldn't control himself, so he pushed the wheelchair away again. Cici ran over to help him push the wheelchair. Didn't you expose yourself? Why are you still in the wheelchair? Gu Nanli's smile became a little gloomy. Don't you have a bunch of bad things to do at home? I'm pretending to be weak so that I can help you arrange the path to the top. Cici trembled. Okay. You can be more nimble. Don't torture those poor people. His military advisor was good at everything, but his methods of torturing people were especially cruel. He was worried that his poor brother wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Gu Nanli supported his chin with one hand and said lazily, I'm in a good mood. I'll accumulate blessings for Wei Wei. I won't deliberately torture others. He would simply and neatly defeat them, cutting the weeds and removing the roots to eliminate future troubles. He no longer needed to be as cruel and violent as before because of insomnia. He could only comfort himself with more exciting and bloody scenes. Cici's expression softened. He suddenly felt that Gu Nanli was truly blessed to be able to obtain the love he wanted. In the room, Wei Wei Bai had already started to pack her things. I don't think we can stay in Gu Nanli's territory anymore. Originally, we wanted to cleanse the Bai family, but the crazy Bai Mu imprisoned all the Bai family members. We had no choice but to go abroad to lie low. Although a lifetime was a very long time. That way, she wouldn't have to worry about the time. However, after completing the strategy, he realized that it was troublesome to take too long. As Wei Wei Bai was packing, she suddenly said, Tongzi, we can only rely on each other for the rest of our lives. The system said, don't worry, your life will be very interesting. Gu Nonli will follow you like a spirit behind your back for the rest of your life. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and became happy, that's true. Traveling around the world, eating good food, seeing beautiful women, experiencing all kinds of different leisurely lives, it will be very interesting. System, are you sure you're not running away? Wei Wei Bai grabbed a bunch of jewelry. Don't worry about Gu Nonli, I'll hide abroad and keep a low profile. Who the hell knows where I'm going? No matter how powerful he is, he won't be able to find me among billions of people. It was not easy to find someone who was hiding abroad and running around. The world was so big, many people would encounter something that they wouldn't encounter in their lifetime. Therefore, as long as she left, the possibility of meeting Gu Nonli in her lifetime was close to zero. This was not a novel where they could meet just because they wanted to. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here, / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 1490. The system did not dare to say anything. Once they reached the 100th level, fate would stick to them like a sticky plaster. It was almost impossible for Wei Wei Bai to easily avoid Gu Nonli. But maybe Bai Weiwei's dog shit luck was good, and she really wouldn't meet him in this lifetime. Wei Wei Bai put all the gold, silver, and jewelry into a box. She only had 1 or 2 sets of clothes to change into and did not bring anything else. After all, money was the king. Now was the best time to leave because Gu Nonli trusted her the most. She could go wherever she wanted. After packing, she suddenly paused and thought. To end everything once and for all, I'll die, okay? The system said. How do you want to die? Wei Wei Bai planned for a while. It's better to die. Otherwise, it won't be good to keep thinking about Gu Nonli. Although she felt that love was a thing, even if it was 100 points of affection. After a few years, the beautiful feeling of dopamine would be gone, and love would be cold. Gu Nonli would definitely forget about her. But these few years would still be very troublesome, so playing dead was a good idea. Wei Wei Bai took out her phone and called Bai Mu. Bai Mu picked up almost immediately. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Do you want to meet?" Bai Mu was speechless. Wei Wei Bai said, "I want to ask about my parents. Do you have a yacht? Let's go up and talk." Although it was very sudden, Bai Mu's tone was still excited. "Okay, I do." "When?" Wei Wei Bai wanted to end this quickly. "In the afternoon. I'm free in the afternoon. Give me the address and I'll go over." Bai Mu immediately told her the location of a port. Bai Weiwei hummed an N and bluntly hung up. Bai Mu looked at his phone in a daze. Then, he became excited. He thought that he would never have the chance to see her again. Bai Mu thought of something and immediately took out his newly found information. He put it together and ran to borrow a yacht. If he didn't have a yacht, he would have to borrow one. In the afternoon, Gu Nonli had to deal with some matters, so Wei Wei Bai was free to do whatever she wanted. Wei Wei Bai carried her small suitcase filled with gold, silver, jewelry, and cash. She generously asked Gu Nonli's driver to send her to the port. When Gu Nonli was lying in the hospital, she often ran around when she was out to handle business. Everyone was used to it, and the driver didn't ask further. When they arrived at the port, the driver said, "Miss Bai, don't you need bodyguards to follow you?" Wei Wei Bai said, "You can follow me. Just get a small boat and follow me. I'm going up to talk to someone about the contract. If you see me in danger, call my boyfriend." Of course, as she was referring to Gu Nonli. His words naturally made everyone feel at ease and unsuspicious. The driver nodded. Wei Wei Bai carried the suitcase and walked towards the yacht at the harbor. The driver also made a call as usual and reported Wei Wei Bai's whereabouts. Soon, Gu Nanli would know where Wei Wei Bai had gone. Gu Nanli happened to be in a meeting. He owed Cici a favor, and in return, he would kill Cici's elder brother. Therefore, all the preparation information at hand was the information of the Atlanta family and Cici's elder brother. He listened to Wei Wei Bai's whereabouts and felt a little strange. You said she went out to sea. Did she want to go out to sea for something recently? Gu Nanli frowned and thought for a while, but he didn't find anything. A faint sense of foreboding made him look up and order, call the driver and bodyguards over. I'll go pick her up. He personally went to pick up Wei Wei Bai. Once her whereabouts were even a little out of his control, he would feel uncomfortable. This was a kind of illness. He felt that ever since his nightmares were cured by Wei Wei Bai, he had a new illness. His new illness was that he couldn't lose Bai Wei Wei. He couldn't imagine the world after losing her. Chapter 1491. Gu Nanli suppressed this thought. They were happy and sweet now, so he should control his uneasiness. Wei Wei Bai boarded the yacht, holding the nearby sea map in her hands. Although the map was complicated, she still found the most suitable escape route with the help of the system's design. To play dead, she also exchanged for an underwater breathing device. It could keep breathing for 12 hours in the sea. It was a godly item. It only had 3 days of life. It was good to have a discount. Wei Wei Bai boarded the yacht and saw the pale-faced Bai Mu. He coughed softly. The gunshot wound had destroyed his health. He said, Wei Wei, I'm very happy to see you again. Wei Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe. Why did she feel like this brother who was not related by blood was going to die? Bai Mu was indeed going to die. His body was in a very bad condition. Gu Nanli's gunshot had destroyed his health. If it was not for the medical treatment, he would probably be lying in a coffin now. Even now, Bai Mu knew that he did not have many years left. Therefore, he used all his time to investigate the exchange between Wei Wei Bai and Gu Nanli. He actually managed to find out something. Wei Wei Bai nodded and looked around. The railings were better for diving, she had to observe first. Bai Mu saw her walking around and was about to speak. Wei Wei Bai said, set sail. The yacht had a captain. Bai Mu ordered and the yacht set sail. Wei Wei Bai's bodyguards immediately followed behind with a small yacht. The system said, I used 1 day of life to buy you a stormy weather setting. Wei Wei Bai was touched, you're becoming more and more like a roundworm in my stomach. The system said, don't you have any other way to describe it? It was not a compliment at all that it looked like a roundworm. Wei Wei Bai said, you're becoming more and more like my precious baby. Pfft, the system was so mushy. It was going to be disgusted to death by the host. He arrived at the bottom of the sea where the system had specified that it would be very difficult to save people. Wei Wei Bai leaned against the railing and looked at Bai Mu calmly. If you have something to say it quickly. Bai Mu was excited when he saw her. Although he felt that her actions were a little strange, he let her be. He took a step forward, his eyes filled with infatuation. Wei Wei, we are not biological siblings. Wei Wei Bai listened to the system notification that Gu Nanli had arrived at the pier. She did not care about what Bai Mu said at all. She was biding her time. The system said, the male lead is on board. Wei Wei Bai waited patiently. Bai Mu held the information and began to explain in detail. After you guys were swapped, Gu Nanli's life in the Gu family wasn't very good. You know that he has a bad and dark personality. He has been a sociopath with bad intentions since he was young. So when Gu Buddha rebelled, he was the most suspicious person to betray Gu Buddha. Wei Wei Bai did not pay much attention to Bai Mu's information. She listened attentively to the system's report. Although the system did not know why she wanted to know the male lead's detailed route, it still told her the truth. He has entered the sea and is about to enter your line of sight. Countdown of 10 seconds until he enters your line of sight. Wei Wei Bai began to prepare. A layer of tears began to appear in her eyes. Bai Mu was stunned. He could not help but reach out to wipe her tears. Wei Wei Bai, are you angry that Gu Nanli killed your parents? The system said, the male lead has entered your line of sight. Entering their line of sight meant that they could see each other. Slash. Chapter 1492. You can search Transmigration System, Adonis, come over to Sashu. Com in Baidu to find the. Wei Wei Bai looked at the ship that was even bigger than Bai Mu's yacht. She knew that Gu Nanli could see her. Almost in an instant, her expression changed. Her eyes turned red and filled with tears of despair. She suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it at Bai Mu, screaming, "Don't come over." Bai Mu was stunned for 2 seconds. Ha! That heart-wrenching scream scared him. Those who didn't know might think that he had done something to molest her. Even though he wanted to, he didn't have the strength. The system was extremely calm. It started taking out orange juice and a small stool, acting like an honest bystander. Ah, look, that drama queen is here again. Bai Mu was frightened by Wei Wei Bai's pitiful appearance. He approached her carefully. Wei Wei, what's wrong with you? Could it be that you can't accept your own background? After all, Bai Qi was still really nice to her. Bai Wei Wei watched as the big ship got closer and closer. She said bluntly, Tongzi, the weather setting. Supermarkets were good. As long as one wasn't picky about the discounted goods, they could buy some godly stuff. Of course, many discounted goods would only be discounted once in their lifetime. Even until now, the substitute sticker had not been discounted a second time. She was really forced to become a super experienced driver. The system pulled out the weather setting and the weather changed immediately. The wind was strong, the waves were dark, the sky was dark, and the clouds were dense. The weather at sea was always changeable, and today was a cloudy day. When it started to drizzle, no one paid much attention. Wei Wei Bai saw the opportunity and reached out to grab Bai Mu's arm, pushing him away violently. Don't come over. I won't believe anything you say. Bai Mu waved the information in his hands. It's all true. Wei Wei, Gu Nanli really killed your biological parents. He's an evil wolf. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled as she pointed the gun at Bai Mu. The despair in her eyes was heart-wrenching. You're the one who made up stories to frame him. I don't believe it. What swapping identities? He killed my parents. Bai Mu was also excited. His attention was attracted by Wei Wei Bai, so he didn't pay much attention to the large ship that appeared. He immediately pulled out one of the pages. It's a paternity test. You can do it again if you want. When Wei Wei Bai saw the information in his hand, her pupils shrank. She could barely hold the gun in her hand. You're lying. I don't believe you, she muttered pitifully. I don't believe it, I don't believe it. Even Bai Mu couldn't bear to see him like this. Suddenly, he saw the gun in Wei Wei Bai's hand tremble. She turned her wrist and aimed it at him. Bai Mu's expression changed drastically, and he immediately reached out to grab the spear. Wei Wei Bai held the gun tightly. From afar, the two of them looked like they were fighting, and they had reached an extremely dangerous point. On the other side of the large ship, the wind blew past Gu Nanli's incomparably cold face. He reached out to grab the gun of the sniper beside him and aimed it at the two people who were fighting on the yacht. Although he couldn't hear anything, But Wei Wei Bai's expression, that terrified and desperate look, made Gu Nanli think that Bai Mu wanted to kill her. No, she wasn't someone who was so afraid of death. Maybe Bai Mu had something on her and was threatening her. That was why she was so desperate. Gu Nanli's hand trembled a little. He took a deep breath and realized that he was actually very nervous. He calmed down and saw that Bai Mu had already snatched her gun away. His gaze turned ferocious. His finger was on the trigger, and the scope was aimed at Bai Mu. His technique was very stable. He just needed to kill Bai Mu with one shot. Crossover system, Adonis, come over here. Chapter 1493. Wei Wei Bai would be saved. He saw that the two of them were separated, and this was the best opportunity to shoot. If Bai Mu pointed the gun at Wei Wei Bai, then everything would be passive. Gu Nanli didn't hesitate and pulled the trigger. This was an action that was almost impossible to miss. Wei Wei Bai calmly heard the system's words. The bullet is coming, move back a little. Wei Wei Bai didn't listen. Instead, she saw the opportunity and slammed into Bai Mu, as if she wanted to snatch the gun in his hand. But the bullet happened to hit her abdomen. The system was shocked and immediately said without thinking, life subsistence guarantee activated. The subsistence guarantee could block the pain and ensure her safety to the greatest extent. This plane was very special, even if she died, she couldn't leave. If Gu Nanli didn't die, then Wei Wei Bai's soul would be bound to him even if she died. Wei Wei Bai definitely wouldn't like it if it became a supernatural world. She was most afraid of ghosts. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little blank. She glanced at the wound on her abdomen. Blood gushed out and dyed her clothes red. Bai Mu's fingers trembled and he almost shouted, Wei Wei Bai. There was no gun and no misfire, so where did the bullet come from? Bai Mu stared at her blankly. She staggered a few steps and then looked at the big ship. Seeing Gu Nanli on the deck, his expression seemed to freeze, and his eyes revealed a kind of despair and shock. It was almost impossible to miss a bullet, but he had actually missed. Gu Nanli's mind was blank. His vision suddenly turned black and white. Black waves hit the deck, and the cold sea water soaked everyone's ankles. But Gu Nanli didn't seem to feel the cold. He suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs, quick, get on the ship. And the rain became heavier. Under the violent rain, the two ships collided. Wei Wei Bai couldn't take it anymore. Her lips trembled and her body couldn't help but fall forward. As for Gu Nanli, he ran forward like a madman. There was still some distance between the two boats, and he could not reach Wei Wei Bai with his outstretched hand. His muscles were trembling uncontrollably, and even his teeth were chattering. Wei Wei, hold my hand, I'll pull you over here. Wei Wei Bai leaned softly against the railing of the yacht and looked at Gu Nanli. Her blood-stained appearance was very weak, but her eyes were terrifyingly bright, as if the flames of life were burning in her eyes for the last time. Gu Nanli wanted to jump over the railing, but a huge wave suddenly rushed over. In the storm, the rocking of the ship made it impossible for him to change ships immediately. Wei Wei Bai's eyes dimmed as she struggled to reach out her hand. Gu Nanli stretched out half of her body, desperately trying to grab her hand. Just as his fingertips touched her pale and cold fingers, she suddenly said, I'm Gu Buddha's daughter. If this was normal, Gu Nanli would be able to perfectly disguise himself when his mind was still calm. He would tell her that she was thinking too much. How could she be Gu Buddha's daughter? All lies were commonplace for him. But at this moment, his mind was buzzing, and only fear appeared in his blank mind. She knew. She knew that they were swapped children. Did she know more than that? Wei Wei Bai saw his frozen expression, and her eyes completely dimmed. Is your liking me also a conspiracy? Because I swapped your identity, got everything you have and lived happily, so you came back to take revenge on me, to TXT. Chapter 1494. Gu Nonli trembled as he said, "No, I didn't want to take revenge on you." Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly. Her face was pale under the rain. "But you hated me from the start." Gu Nonli had already grabbed her hand. He stared at her hand, wanting to pull her over. "No, I've never hated you." Wei Wei Bai sighed. "I heard that you're not doing well, but I'm so happy." Gu Nonli realized that her wound was bleeding even more because of the rain. He didn't dare to take the risk and pulled her over. One of his legs was already over the railing. He wanted to go over and bring her back. He stared at her, his pupils constricting. "No, my life is also very good. Don't you see that I'm very good now?" Wei Wei Bai's voice weakened. Back then, were you the one who instigated Gu Buddha to die?" This was the information that had been unlocked. Even Bai Mu couldn't find it. The system had just transmitted it to her. Gu Nonli had completely given up on the idea of gaining kinship and began to think of ways to kill Gu Buddha's entire family. He was too young and didn't have the ability to attack. Even if he used poison, it would be a stupid method. He couldn't get away with it. So, he used the most terrifying method to keep hinting at Gu Buddha. At that time, he had the perfect talent for being a charlatan. He taught himself a lot of psychology and hypnotism. He began to use all kinds of methods to repeatedly evoke the most terrifying thing in Gu Buddha's heart when he wasn't paying attention. Gu Nonli was a criminal genius. He stood in the shadows. She watched as Gu Buddha started to become suspicious. He kept deepening his guilt, fear, and all sorts of negative emotions. Gu Nonli kept hinting that as long as he killed Bai Qi, he would be saved. Then, Gu Buddha suddenly betrayed him. It was almost an impulsive crime. So, after he killed Bai Qi's wife, he was caught and killed by Bai Qi. Gu Nonli was already prepared. When the plan started, he escaped from the Gu family and didn't become a sacrifice. So, back then, Gu Buddha and Bai Qi were both injured and killed. The culprit behind all this was actually the inconspicuous Gu Nonli. After Wei Wei Bai read the information, she only had one feeling. This guy was too scary. How was this guy a husky? He was simply a vicious criminal with a high IQ. If he suddenly became interested in a few serial murder cases, no one would be able to trace it back to him for the rest of his life. Or perhaps, one day, he would get tired of having a wife, and it would be too easy for him to murder his wife. If she were to live with such a pervert, would she have to be on guard for the rest of her life? When Gu Nali heard her question, his entire body turned cold. It was as if the temperature of his blood had left his body. Back then, no one knew about such a secretive matter. It was impossible for her to know that this was a test. He planned Gu Buddha's betrayal all by himself. Back then, Gu Buddha, his wife, and the rest of the Gu family were all killed by Bai Qi. And Bai Qi also lost his most beloved wife. Everyone who died was part of his plan. He was the one who pushed it. That was the first time he planned to kill someone. In the end, so many people died, and he completed the plan. But he didn't let his hands be stained with blood, and no one found out that he was the mastermind. At that time, he had already started to show the shadow of the venomous schemer. It was also at that time that he started to have nightmares and insomnia. Chapter 1495. In the dream, Gu Buddha was strangling his neck and kept saying why he didn't die. He didn't tell anyone the second half of the sentence. In the nightmare, the second half of Gu Buddha's line was, "The one who died was you, the murderer." He had always been the murderer. Gu Nanli's expression became gentle. Wei Wei, who are you listening to these irrelevant words? How can you be Gu Buddha's daughter? Bai Mu wants to drive a wedge between us. Would you rather believe the enemy than me? His expression was so gentle, affectionate, and sorrowful. There was a kind of seductive purity on his youthful face. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, as if she was convinced by him. Gu Nanli gently touched her cold fingers and adjusted the rhythm of his voice to make people trust him. Let's go home. You're injured, so we'll go for treatment immediately. The flames in Wei Wei Bai's eyes were finally extinguished. Clear tears came out of her eyes. Her expression, however, was indifferent and even cold. You did everything back then. You came back this time to take my life. You came back to take revenge on us from the beginning. His childhood misfortune caused him to hate everything. The negative 50 favorability was actually not all targeted at Wei Wei Bai. It was the Bai family. Everyone in the Gu family was the target of his hatred. Before he was sure whether he was Bai Chi's child, he had already put everyone on trial. His heart had long been twisted. He wanted to drag everyone to hell and let everyone die to atone for his abuse of childhood. Wei Wei Bai was just one of the targets of his revenge. Gu Nanli's lips trembled, but he still smiled. Wei Wei, I'll come and get you. Don't think too much. Yes, he was here for revenge. But she saved him and let him know what happiness was. She pulled him back from the dark hell. So he couldn't lose her, not even the slightest possibility. He could make up for it. He could continue to perfect this lie and dispel her doubts. No matter who told her, no matter what evidence they had. He had the ability to make her believe that he was a victim and not a murderer. He was the best at lying. So don't leave him. The waves became even more turbulent, and the two ships were actually separated by the force of the waves. Gu Nanli immediately grabbed her hand. His men were already boarding the other party's ship. Soon, she would return to his side. The bullet was not fatal, and there was enough time to bring her back safely. Gu Nanli suppressed his panic and was about to say something. Bai Wei Wei suddenly exerted force, pulling one finger at a time from his hand. Gu Nanli looked up at her in disbelief. His reddened eyes made him look like a child who had been hurt. As long as he didn't put on an extremely gloomy expression, he always had a trace of youthfulness. It made people think that he was innocent and pitiful. He used to hate this appearance of his the most, which was why he used his hair to cover most of his eyes. But now, he wished that he could evoke even the slightest bit of pity from her. Wei Wei Bai's voice was weak and calm. So I took away your childhood, and you took away my biological parents and adoptive mother. We're even. After saying that, she shook off his hand fiercely. A huge wave suddenly surged, and the ship tilted violently. Wei Wei Bai looked at Gu Nanli calmly and indifferently. Her eyes were so dim that they were broken. If I could, I would have never met you. Gu Nanli, I hate you. The huge wave hit and she was thrown out of the ship. Slash. Chapter 1496. In the towering waves, Gu Nanli watched as Wei Wei Bai disappeared into the endless dark sea. Gu Nanli's hands were drenched by the seawater, leaving behind wet stains. He seemed to have suddenly sobered up and was about to jump over the railing. He could bring her back safely in the water last time, and he could do it this time too. But before he could do it, several subordinates rushed over and roared, "Mr. Gu, you can't go down. There are undercurrents below, and the storm is coming. You'll definitely die if you go down." No one could escape from the power of the undercurrents. Anyone who went down would die. The boat began to tilt. If they didn't leave now, they would capsize and die here. Gu Nanli's actions were even more ferocious. He single-handedly restrained a subordinate who was trying to stop him, took out a handgun, and placed it on the man's head. He fired without hesitation. Blood splattered all over his face. He threw the corpse away and looked coldly at those who dared to stop him like a demon. Even men who were used to bloodshed were so scared that their legs turned to jelly at this moment. The blood on Gu Nonli's face was washed away by the storm, revealing a face that was so pale that it was almost transparent. It was as exquisite as a jade sculpture. But this exquisiteness was unusually horrifying because of the murderous aura. After intimidating everyone at the first moment, Gu Nonli threw away the gun without hesitation. In the violent storm, in the violent waves, he stepped over the railing and quickly jumped into the sea. Bai Mu also staggered out. He held a gun in his hand and grabbed the railing as if he wanted to jump out. But suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He covered his chest that had been shot and squatted down. Bai Mu thought of Wei Bai's appearance just now. He trembled as he looked at the documents soaked in seawater. Was it his fault? If he hadn't told her, she wouldn't have been so agitated. She wouldn't have been shot, and she wouldn't have died. Jumping into the sea with a wound. In this kind of weather, in this kind of sea, it was impossible to be saved. Bai Mu smiled tragically and picked up Wei Bai's gun to his throat. If it wasn't for him, Wei Bai wouldn't have died. I'd better go and apologize to her first. He pulled the trigger and the bullet went through his throat. Blood splattered on the ground and was washed away by the sea. That day was everyone's nightmare. After Wei Bai died, Gu Nonli also jumped into the sea. Almost immediately, Cici mobilized all the forces of both of them to seal off the sea on a large scale. Then, he risked his life and began the difficult salvage. Fortunately, the storm came and went quickly. They finally caught Gu Nonli when the storm subsided. He was already delirious, but he continued to dive down to search for that impossible figure. It was also because of Gu Nonli's terrifying perseverance and exceptional luck. Only then did Cici manage to catch him. In such a vast sea, even if many ships were dispatched, it would still be a matter of luck to scoop up a person. And Wei Bai obviously didn't have such luck. When Gu Nonli was pulled onto the boat, his whole body trembled and he struggled to open his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked extremely terrifying. He grabbed Cici's clothes tightly. Where is she? Have you found Wei? Cici couldn't bear to see him like this. His heart was in a mess. Gu Nonli didn't look as calm and rational as usual. He asked sternly, have you found her? Cici didn't dare lie to him. He said helplessly, no, Gu. Gu Nonli pushed Cici away and jumped into the sea without thinking. Although the storm was over, the sea was so complicated that it was lucky to be able to find Gu Nonli. If Gu Nonli jumped down again, he could only hold a funeral for him. Cici steeled his heart and raised his hand to hit him hard on the neck. Gu Nonli swayed a little, but she didn't faint. But Cici didn't give him any chance. A few people immediately rushed over. Together with the tall and strong Cici, they pinned down Gu Nonli who was about to faint. Gu Nonli's eyes were red as he roared, let go of me, Cici Atlanta, let go of me. Cici's face showed a pained expression, but his hand was steady as he pushed a tranquilizer into his arm. I'm sorry, but I can't lose you, brother. Wei Bai definitely wouldn't survive. And he couldn't let Gu Nonli die with her. Gu Nonli gripped Cici's hand so hard that it was bleeding. He was like a vicious wolf, staring at Cici with unspeakable hatred. Cici felt goosebumps on his back as he watched him. But in the end, Gu Nonli couldn't resist the drug and slowly closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Cici looked at him worriedly. If he lost Wei Bai, what would he do in the future? Was it true that first love didn't have a good ending? Chapter 1497. In a hospital somewhere far away, the system was still roaring. Do you think I'm omnipotent? What would happen if I really died? Jumping down while injured in that kind of weather could kill anyone at any time. Even the life support system was not omnipotent. If it had not used 30 of its health points to buy a protective cushion, Wei Wei Bai would have been sucked into the whirlpool and died. Wei Wei Bai flipped through the travel brochure and said calmly, I'm doing this for Gu Nanli's sake. If I really did die, he would be able to find the next one in peace. I've already said that I hate him, he would be upset whenever he thinks of me. He would not think about me anymore. In a hospital somewhere far away, the system was still roaring. Do you think I'm omnipotent? What would happen if I really died? Jumping down while injured in that kind of weather could kill anyone at any time. Even the life support system was not omnipotent. If it had not used 30 of its health points to buy a protective cushion, Wei Wei Bai would have been sucked into the whirlpool and died. Wei Wei Bai flipped through the travel brochure and said calmly, I'm doing this for Gu Nanli's sake. If I really did die, he would be able to find the next one in peace. I've already said that I hate him, he would be upset whenever he thinks of me. He would not think about me anymore. The system said, but you can't really go looking for death. Using this method to torture Gu Nanli was even scarier than the devil. Wei Wei Bai actually thought that this was for Gu Nanli's sake. Gu Nanli would be considered strong if he did not commit suicide because of this. Wei Wei Bai said casually, don't I have you? With you here, I can be at ease. The system was speechless. Then it blushed. Being praised by its host, it was actually a little shy. What was going on? Wei Wei Bai laid on the hospital bed, calmly planning where it would end after its injury was healed. After the strategy was completed, the feeling of getting rid of the person being conquered was wonderful. Every time he saw Gu Nanli, he would think of work and strategies. It was too tiring. She might as well end this once and for all and let Gu Nanli think that she was dead. Then, they could part on good terms. Wei Wei Bai touched the box by the bed. It contained her belongings. Now, she was also a rich woman. She sighed. Life was really beautiful. Beautiful men, beautiful scenery, and delicious food were all calling out to her. She touched the wound on her stomach and decided to leave this place after she was done recuperating. Wei Wei Bai slowly closed her eyes. Tongzi, I haven't felt so relaxed in a long time. Mission complete, Gu Nanli was free from his job. The rest of the time was hers. There was no impatience to leave, and no sense of urgency in the face of death. She had been running and finally had some time to rest in this plane. The system was silent for a long time before saying, go to sleep, I'll watch over you. Wei Wei Bai nodded in relief. Remember to keep a close eye on the box. This was all money. The system's face was filled with sadness. When it heard the host's words, it stiffened. Could she not give it a moment to properly grieve? She only thought about money. When did she also think about whether it had finished its snacks? Thinking about snacks, the system took out the orange juice mixed with water and drank it slowly. If it finished the orange juice, there would be nothing left to eat. The system was sad again. Suddenly, it saw the cup in its hand. When it bought this cup, it was a limited edition. Could it sell some life points? Then, the system turned around and looked at the cups and plates that it had neglected. Oh, it accidentally found a small source of income. Even the little stool under its butt could be sold. The tranquil surface of the sea was disrupted by a bunch of patrol boats. Cici helplessly hugged his head and squatted by the side. He kept persuading, it's been a month, Gu. Even the corpses have been eaten by the fish. Give up. The man sitting in front of him slowly turned around. There was no trace of life in his eyes. Even his pupils were a little lax. Everyone could see that something was wrong with him. But they did not dare to persuade him. After all, Gu Nonli's current state was no different from that of a lunatic. Only Cici still had some dignity. He was not crushed by Gu Nonli. Cici shut up after being glared at by Gu Nonli. He could only squat obediently. The system said, but you can't really court death. And using this method to torture Gu Nonli was scarier than the devil. Wei Wei Bai actually thought that this was for Gu Nonli's good. Gu Nonli was strong enough to not be tortured to suicide by her. Wei Wei Bai casually said, "Don't I have you? With you here, I can be at ease." The system was speechless. Then, it blushed. It was actually a little shy after being praised by the host. What was going on? Wei Wei Bai laid on the hospital bed. She was peacefully planning where she would end up after her injury was healed. After the strategy was completed, the feeling of being left behind by the conqueror was wonderful. Every time she saw Gu Nonli, she would think about her work and the strategy. It was too tiring. She might as well just end it all and let Gu Nonli think that she was dead. Then, they could just part on good terms. Wei Wei Bai touched the box by the bed. It contained her belongings. Now, she was also a little rich woman. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// Chapter 1498. Gu Nonli continued to look at the sea. His expression was frozen, and his eyes were strangely empty. He seemed to be waiting for a result. Or he seemed to be waiting for death. Everyone knew that Wei Wei Bai was definitely dead. It was common for people who died at sea to not be found. It was a mistake to fish for corpses here. After all, corpses would flow with the undercurrent to the sea tens of thousands of miles away. Perhaps they were bitten by fish, or perhaps they were washed to the bottom of the sea by something and did not float up. There were all kinds of possibilities, but the possibility of being found was basically zero. Gu Nonli did not care and tried his best to fish for corpses. He did not have any of his usual cleverness. Cici did not dare to stop him. That day, he brought him back, but he woke up in less than half a day. He rushed out almost crazily, as if he would shoot anyone who stopped him. It could scare everyone to death. Cici had never seen Gu Nonli like this. He had lost his mind to the extreme. He was no different from a lunatic. Moreover, that kind of despair that reached his bones was simply unbearable to look at. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be his last hope. And this hope was shattered, and it even carried hatred for him. Even the wound on her abdomen before she died was accidentally caused by Gu Nonli. How could Gu Nonli live on? Therefore, Cici stopped him and told him that there was still hope. After all, there was still a golden 3-day rescue period for earthquakes. Wei Wei Bai might be able to live. At that time, he was only comforting him. After all, an earthquake was completely different from the sea. Moreover, Wei Wei Bai was injured. It was not like she was a god if she could live. However, Gu Nonli actually believed him. Then, he spent the entire month searching for Wei Wei Bai. 3 days had passed. No, 30 days had passed. Gu Nonli still did not give up. It was simply too scary. Cici vaguely knew that he had been convulsing for a long time. Gu Nonli actually knew that Wei Wei Bai was dead, but he didn't care and still came to find her. All for the sake of saving himself. It was as if he really admitted that Wei Wei Bai was dead and Gu Nonli couldn't live either. Cici was so frightened by this thought that he was in a daze and broke out in a cold sweat. Another day came to an end, with no results. The person who came to report the progress was drenched in cold sweat and stuttered. After all, who could fish out a dead person who had been swept away by the waves a month ago? Wasn't this a joke? However, because it was Gu Nonli, everyone had no choice but to play along with this big shot. He played until he trembled in fear, suffering unspeakably. When Gu Nonli heard the result, he didn't say anything. He just looked at the sea in silence. Suddenly, he walked forward as if he was about to step over the railing and fall into the sea. Cici was frightened and immediately rushed forward, grabbing his arm tightly. He was worried that he would take things too hard and follow Wei Wei Bai. Gu, we didn't find anything today. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll definitely find her. Cici didn't dare to let go and said in a trembling voice. Gu Nonli stared blankly at the sea and suddenly said, "She's in a lot of pain." Cici's mouth twitched, but he still tried to comfort him. "We'll find her. Then she won't be in pain anymore." Gu Nonli slowly turned to look at him, but his eyes were not focused at all. His face was so gray that there was no trace of color. He was so weak that he could disappear at any time. His body was not good to begin with. With this torment, Cici was worried that he wouldn't live long in the future. Gu Nonli suddenly said with a hoarse voice, "I had a nightmare. I dreamt that she was covered in blood. She said that she hated me and didn't want to see me. She asked me not to look for her for the rest of my life." /save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1499. Cici knew that nightmares were a special experience for Gu Nonli. When others had nightmares, they would be fine for a while. However, Gu Nonli's nightmares were like paranoia. Once he was entangled with nightmares, the terrible insomnia would appear. His childhood nightmares had been cured by Wei Wei Bai. In the future, who would he find to treat Wei Wei Bai's nightmares of death? Cici had a splitting headache. This month had been tormenting him to the point of exhaustion. He steeled his heart and said, "Gu, the dead can't be brought back to life. Don't torture yourself. No matter how sad it is, you have to endure it. Haven't you endured it for so many years?" Everyone knew that Gu Nonli had a vicious heart and was a scheming person. However, Cici knew that he still had some humanity. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been tormented by nightmares for so many years. Wei Wei Bai's arrival had brought out the best side of Gu Nonli. However, after she left, Gu Nonli seemed to have lost his soul. He was doomed at any moment. Gu Nonli wanted to break free from his hand. His eyes stared blankly at the sea. She should hate me. I've never had good intentions towards her. From the beginning to the end, he had approached her with ill intentions. Because she had taken away his childhood and made him live in hell from the moment he was born. He had never been treated with true warmth. Therefore, in his heart, Wei Wei Bai was a person that he was jealous of and disgusted with. The more miserable his life was, the more malicious he felt towards her. Gu Nonli muttered to himself, "She should hate me. I'm a piece of trash, a rat in the swamp. The mistake in the beginning caused us to be wrong from the beginning to the end. I shouldn't have approached her and let her fall into this dark swamp like me. He didn't deserve her. It was right for her to hate him." The more he looked at Gu Nonli, the more he felt that something was wrong. Cici suddenly said, "I think there's something fishy about this matter. I wanted to tell you after you've calmed down, but you won't be able to calm down for a while." Gu Nonli continued to stare at the sea as if he hadn't heard him. Cici had a strange feeling that if he let go, Gu Nonli would immediately jump into the sea to commit suicide. He could only try his best to keep Gu Nonli alive. "Your house has been burgled." Gu Nonli did not care about the theft at all. He had lost the most important person to him. Even if he lost his entire business, it didn't matter to him. Wei Wei Bai was wrong. The most important thing to him was not his career, but her. CC saw that he could no longer hold him back and immediately roared. The things that were stolen were all her things, and it was a large theft case. All of them were jewelry and cash. Her clothes were not touched, but I can still see that about 2 sets of clothes were stolen. Something flashed through Gu Nonli's muddled mind. He suddenly looked at CC in a daze, and his eyes lit up strangely. The things that were stolen were all her things. CC saw that there was hope and immediately said, yes, and the strange thing was that they were all in the room. All the expensive and small things you gave her are gone. It's more like she took them than they were stolen. Gu Nonli suddenly asked coldly, what about the skincare products? CC was confused. Skincare products? Who would care if the skincare products were missing, except for the owner who needed them? Gu Nonli suddenly felt in CC's pocket and took out his phone to call back. He asked the housekeeper, besides the expensive things that were stolen from Wei Wei's room, what else was stolen? The housekeeper did not dare to take anything and immediately answered in detail, clothes, 5 bottles of nail polish, and a tube of used red lipstick. The Chapter 1500. Gu Nonli's breathing quickened. He reached out and pressed his chest as if to calm his accelerated heartbeat. What color is the nail polish? The housekeeper said 5 colors. They were all Wei Wei Bai's favorite and most commonly used color. And those 5 bottles of nail polish had been used. If it wasn't for a detailed search, or even Gu Nonli's questioning, no one would have cared about such a small thing. After Gu Nonli put down his phone, he stared at the sea. His gray and unfocused eyes began to gather a little light. Go back, he said softly. CC couldn't hear him for a moment, so he asked in confusion, Gu? Gu Nonli's voice became cold. Go back. After saying that, Gu Nonli turned around and left. After taking 2 steps, he staggered and suddenly fell down. If CC hadn't grabbed his clothes in time, Gu Nonli would have fallen into the sea. After a month of sleepless nights, coupled with heart-wrenching despair, Gu Nonli only heaved a sigh of relief. His entire person collapsed. When he returned, he didn't even have time to ask about the stolen things. Instead, he had a high fever. In serious cases, he even coughed up a mouthful of blood. The doctor stayed overnight and took shifts for several days before Gu Nonli's condition barely stabilized. When Gu Nonli collapsed, CC didn't just have to stabilize their careers. He also had to start investigating where the jewelry and nail polish went. When he investigated, he found out that something was wrong. When Wei Wei Bai left that day, the driver said that she was carrying a box. After some speculation, CC confirmed that the things weren't stolen, but taken away by Wei Wei Bai. Why did she take those things? After the incident a month ago, the storm passed and they found the wet documents on Bai Mu's boat. The information was incomplete, and many of them couldn't be found in the sea. So they didn't know how much information Bai Mu had checked. The rest of the information was definitely the investigation report exchanged between Wei Wei Bai and Gu Nonli. There was even a paternity test between Wei Wei Bai and Gu Bide. Looking at the shocking information, he was shocked. Gu Nonli was silent for a long time, then laughed hysterically. So the things Bai Wei Wei knew were all told to her by Bai Mu. But now, the strangest thing was that when Wei Wei Bai left with the box, it seemed like she was escaping from Gu Nonli. After all, everyone knew that money was the most important thing. And Bai Wei Wei was straightforward. What she brought was jewelry and money. As well as her favorite nail polish and lipstick. Why did she bring these things she in advance? It was as if she had wanted to leave Gu Nali from the very beginning. The more doubts he had, the more relieved Cici was. Because of these doubts, Gu Nali was at least not half dead. When he was serious, he could really pull himself together. So a week later, after Gu Nali's condition stabilized, Cici told him all these speculations. Gu Nali coughed softly. The man's haggard and thin appearance made him look even more harmless. But there was a dangerous flame burning in his eyes. Do you think she deliberately jumped into the sea and made me think that she was dead so that she could leave me? His voice was slow and cold, like a venomous snake, making people feel uncomfortable. Cici felt that the terrifying snake schemer was back. https://www.sashu.com/ Full text, https://www.sashu.com// Download text, https://www.sashu.com Mobile text, https://m.sashu.com/// Chapter 1501. Cici said carefully, in that situation, it was very easy for people to die. How could an act be so real? Unless Wei Wei Bai wanted to commit suicide. In that case, even the most prepared person would not be able to save her. Moreover, their people had controlled the scene immediately. If there were other boats, they would have been discovered long ago. Or did the seriously injured Wei Wei Bai swim ashore? Humans were not fish. How could they not breathe for several hours? Gu Nali looked at him gloomily and then smiled. If she wanted to leave me from the start, why was she with me? Cici did not answer. Gu Nali muttered to himself. Why did she say that she liked me, said that she wanted to protect me, and stayed by my side? Every word and sentence made one's heart palpitate. Gu Nali was terrifyingly calm. He said softly, or was she lying to me? She didn't like me at all. Cici's mouth twitched. He felt that Gu Nali was a bit obsessed. Gu Nali was now using a suspicious point to convince himself that Wei Wei Bai could be alive. He did not want to admit that Wei Wei Bai was dead at all. He was so silly that it made one's heart ache. I think she likes you very much. Really? How could a woman give so much if she didn't like you? He suddenly remembered seeing Wei Wei Bai's incomparably calm eyes. He trembled and did not dare to say it. He was afraid that Gu Nali would go crazy. Gu Nali lowered his eyes. Dark and painful emotions were rolling in the depths of his eyes. He took a deep breath and felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then he said coldly, "Tell people to see if there are any jewelry in the market." "It's hers." It was the last fight. Logically, he knew that Wei Wei Bai could not be alive under such circumstances. But what if? What if everything was just a setup? What if she actually wanted to leave him from the start, so she put on an act to make him think that she was dead? As long as there was the slightest possibility that she was acting, then when she fell into the sea, there would definitely be someone to rescue her. As long as there was the slightest possibility that she was saved, there was a chance that she could survive. This was the only thought Gu Nali had right now. Being forced to the edge of a cliff and hugging a blade of grass, he felt like he could die at any moment. Cici nodded and then turned and went out to order people to investigate this matter. When he walked out, he saw Gu Nali leaning against the bed. He had lost a lot of weight this month. No one knew what Gu Nali was thinking about. He stared blankly at the wall opposite him. Cici sighed and then left, leaving him alone. And Wei Wei Bai happened to be selling a small part of the jewelry in the black market. This month, she had healed her wound and paid the hospital in cash. So, to live a better life, she exchanged some jewelry. As for whether these jewels would be seen by Gu Nonli, he probably wouldn't. After all, if she died, Gu Nonli would miss her for a period of time. It would also match the time when she risked her life to win the game. So basically, if the jewelry went missing, such a small thing like that probably wouldn't be told to Gu Nonli. She knew how busy Gu Nonli was, and recently, Cece's family matters. He had so many things to do, so the butler would deal with those small things by himself. In the end, it would become a small report and directly accumulate in the database. Of course, Wei Bai still had a plan. She would take apart the more eye-catching jewelry and sell it. This way, even if they wanted to investigate, they wouldn't be able to find out where the jewelry went. Wei Bai said to the system, "Let's go to M country to get a temporary residence permit first. After a period of time, we will become official residents and then travel around the world." Chapter 1502. She needed a place to stay. Originally, it was best to stay in China, but if she suddenly met Gu Nonli there one day, it would be a big problem. The system was in the midst of bargaining with the trash collector. It casually said, "Sure, anywhere is fine." It was selling a set of wine glasses. There was no wine left, so the glasses were useless. So it planned to sell. Wei Bai said, "If you see someone strange, remember to remind me." The system's bargaining reached the most critical moment. It heard the host's words and said perfunctorily, "Okay, okay, okay." Wei Bai was relieved. And the system was arguing with the junk collector. Only 10 days of life. Profiteer, don't you know? This is a top-grade glass made of the best glass in some XX high-level plane. It has at least 100 days of life. The junk system said, "You've sold it to me, and you still want 100 days. Even 1 day is too much. 50 days, no less. Bah, do you want to sell it for 12 days? 50. 12. After Wei Bai boarded the first-class plane, she put on her eye mask and went to sleep because the system was there. The first-class seat was very big. She pulled the blanket and almost hit it on the seat. Not long after she fell asleep, a familiar figure appeared in the first-class cabin. His cold and lifeless face had a sickly pale color. His eyes were so dark that it was impossible to see the depth. The assistant who followed him said softly, "Mr. Gu, you need to take your medicine." Gu Nonli didn't say anything. Because the private plane broke down for some reason, he just boarded the fastest plane to M country. There were only 3 or 4 passengers in the first-class cabin today. Because it was the off-season, and because it was late. He sat down. The assistant helped to bring the medicine and water. Gu Nonli took the medicine expressionlessly and then closed his eyes. The corner of the blanket on the passenger in front fell to the side of the chair. Gu Nonli looked at the corner of the blanket. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion. But he couldn't sleep. After a month, they still couldn't find the whereabouts of the jewelry. Today, they received news that a necklace had appeared in the biggest auction in M country. It looked very similar to Wei Bai's necklace. Gu Nonli looked at the picture and felt that it was indeed similar. But it might not be hers. However, he still personally flew to M country. If he couldn't find any clues about her, he would go crazy. His recent nightmares were all about her dying. If this continued, he would collapse sooner or later. Gu Nonli slowly closed his eyes. There seemed to be a familiar scent in the air. He began to hallucinate again. Gu Nonli laughed at himself. He was finally going crazy. Wei Bai, on the other hand, changed her position and continued to sleep. She was completely unaware that Gu Nonli was sitting behind her. Whenever she woke up and looked up, the two of them would look at each other. Meanwhile, the system had already started arguing with the junk collection system. At least 30. If it's any lower, I'll smash the cup and swallow it. 20 is the highest. You've already sold it to the junk collection station and you still want a higher price. Aren't you insulting our garbage collection station? The two of them were so hyped up that the system didn't notice Gu Nonli's appearance at all. It also didn't remind Wei Bai. When the plane landed, Wei Bai, who had slept soundly, was about to get up. Her hand had just grabbed the back of the chair and she didn't have time to use force. The system's voice finally sounded. Don't get up yet. Wei Bai was confused. The system said, let me tell you a piece of bad news /. Chapter 1503. Wei Bai's expression changed. Did someone steal my money? System, no. Wei Bai, then there's no bad news. With money, anywhere in this world is beautiful. The system was silent, then it finally said, the male lead is sitting behind you. The scary fate was finally starting to appear. No matter where they went, they would bump into each other. Even if they couldn't bump into each other, fate would force them to meet. 100% favorable impression wasn't a joke. Wei Bai's body stiffened, her fingers slowly retracted. Gu Nonli had already stood up and was about to get off the plane. He glanced coldly and saw Wei Bai's fingers that she couldn't retract in time. The pink rose nail polish on her fingernails shone with a moving luster. Gu Nonli glanced at it briefly, but before he could take a closer look, the assistant came up. Mr. Gu, it's time to go down. Gu Nonli nodded and turned to follow the assistant. Wei Bai's body stiffened. Did he leave? System, yes. Wei Bai, why didn't you remind me that he was coming? She was scared out of her wits. If she met Gu Nonli face to face, there would be no explanation for this misunderstanding, and they would probably fight to the death. The system guiltily hugged the 25 life points that it had just sold the cup. It's not that I saw your sleeping face, I couldn't bear to disturb you. Wei Bai, it sounded like a lie, but it still passed. After all, her sleeping face was indeed moving. Wei Bai immediately tidied herself up, then carried her luggage and got off the plane. I can't come to M country, I'll buy another ticket at the airport and leave this country. After that, she quickly walked to the ticket hall. Gu Nonli, who was walking out, suddenly stopped. A light flashed in his tired and muddled mind. He slowly turned around, although the color of their nail polish was similar. But when he missed Wei Bai, he would study her nail polish every day. Among the nail polish colors that she took away, there was the color that the finger had just painted on. What was even stranger was that he actually found that hand very beautiful. Other than Wei Bai, he looked at everyone the same way. He did not feel anything at all. No matter how beautiful she was, she felt like she was looking at a piece of pork. But why did he feel amazed by this hand? Gu Nonli's footsteps paused for a moment before she continued to walk forward. Maybe it was just an illusion. Gu Nonli no longer had any confidence in himself because he felt like he was going to go crazy at any moment. Now that he was walking back and forth on the edge of the abyss of suicide every day, none of his feelings were accurate. After buying the tickets, Wei Bai looked at the time. There were still 2 minutes before they could board the plane again. Fortunately, Gu Nonli did not see her. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know where to run now. She bought a wide-brimmed hat at the airport store and put it on to cover half her face. Then, like a quail, she sat in the corner seat. When she heard the system say that Gu Nonli had already boarded the car and was about to leave, Wei Bai finally heaved a sigh of relief. If they really met, how was she going to explain that she was alive and kicking? Could she say that a dolphin saved her? Gu Nonly would beat her into a dolphin. Wei Wei Bai held a magazine and covered her entire face. She finally heaved a sigh of relief and felt that her sense of security had returned. The car carrying Gu Nonly suddenly stopped. The driver asked in confusion, "Mr. Gu?" Gu Nonly pursed his lips, his eyes extremely dark. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Download of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1504. He looked back at the airport not far away, then suddenly pushed the door open and walked out. The driver and assistant also got off the car and followed him. The uncomfortable feeling in Gu Nonly's heart became more and more obvious. The further he was from the airport, the more he felt like he had lost something. He needed to go back and confirm who the owner of that hand was. When he was halfway there, Gu Nonly seemed to have noticed something, his expression changed and he shouted, "Get down." Everyone got down at the same time, and the car not far away exploded with a boom. If it wasn't for Gu Nonly suddenly getting off the car, they would have all died in the explosion. Gu Nonly took out his gun almost instantly, flashed to a nearby building, and then ran desperately to the airport. He knew almost immediately that this auction must be a trap to lure him to M country. After Blair was sent back by him, he probably thought about how to take revenge every day. He didn't give them a chance before, but now that he set foot on this place, he was mentally prepared. But he didn't expect that the car would be tampered with as soon as he got off the plane. Gu Nonly quickly ran into the airport hall, and a bunch of attackers ran in crazily behind him. When the system saw this, it only had time to tell Wei Wei Bai, "The male lead is running here." Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, and almost immediately ran to the female bathroom. Why did Gu Nonly run back? Did he see her? Entering the bathroom, she rushed in through a single door, then closed the door. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Gu Nonly found me." The system said, "No, he ran back because he was being chased." Wei Wei Bai breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good, I guess his escape route won't be through the female bathroom." Wei Wei Bai sat very quietly on the toilet lid in a daze. The sound of fighting came from outside, and the soldiers kept banging non-stop. The system said, "The male lead killed a few pursuers, his running speed can break the world's sprinting speed." Wei Wei Bai was bored from waiting, so she took out her phone to read a Mary Sue novel. The system kept talking about Gu Nonly's whereabouts. Wei Wei Bai was engrossed in her novel and said, "Don't worry about him. He will run out of the airport soon." Gu Nonly's ability was still very ferocious. The usual assassinations and hunts were not enough to destroy him. The system nodded and looked at Gu Nonly. She suddenly felt that the direction he was running in was a little familiar. Just as the system was about to remind him, the junk collection system had already roared through the connection. "Why are you selling me second-hand goods? Didn't you say that the cups were brand new?" The system turned its head and roared, "Of course it's new." Tattered System said, "One of the cups is filled with orange juice." The system replied, "That's impossible, I licked it clean." While she was distracted, Wei Wei Bai couldn't react at all when the bathroom door was pushed open. The man standing outside the door was also stunned. Bai Wei Wei looked up. Under the cold ceiling lamp, the white light shone on the man's blood-stained handsome face. In the depths of his dark eyes, there was a terrible and intense feeling of malevolence. He seemed to be a little slow and blinked slowly, as if he was confirming something. The air was very quiet. It was just a random door that was pushed open, and it just so happened to be pushed to Wei Wei Bai. Fate was such a perverse thing when it came to flirting. Wei Wei Bai held her phone and carefully called Tongzi. The system didn't dare to make a sound. As if finally confirming that she was not an illusion, Gu Nonli's eyes were bloodshot. The is at https://m sashu. Com save button to record this chapter. Chapter 1505. He walked slowly, one step at a time, to the cramped single stall in the bathroom. Wei Wei Bai held her phone and looked up with a stiff expression. His huge shadow loomed over her. This oppressive feeling was murderous. Gu Nonli closed the door and leaned against it. She lowered her head and stared at her with cold, gloomy eyes. She felt like she was being dismembered by his gaze. Just as Bai Weiwei was about to say something, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside the bathroom. Where did he go? We have to catch him before help comes. Wei Wei Bai really wanted to shout, "Here, the person you're looking for is here." But when she saw the gun in Gu Nonli's hand, his bloody fingers, and his face, she was stunned and didn't dare to say a word. This was the standard model of a murderer. She felt like Gu Nonli's gun would shoot her in the next moment. Those people didn't expect Gu Nonli to escape to the women's bathroom. Wei Wei Bai also felt that with Gu Nonli's temperament, it was unlikely that he would casually open someone's bathroom door. That was too uncultured. The system cautiously reminded, "There's a pipe above your head. It's the air conditioning pipe." So Gu Nonli came for the pipe. If those people outside also found the women's bathroom, then he could directly open the pipe door and escape. Of course, if he opened the door and saw Wei Wei Bai, it would probably be a fluke. Those people outside finally ran away. None of them thought that there was someone hiding in the women's bathroom. They probably thought that Gu Nonli was hiding in the plane. When the footsteps of the pursuers gradually disappeared, Wei Wei Bai's heart rose little by little. Gu Nonli didn't say anything. He didn't even touch Wei Wei Bai. He just blocked the door and stared at her. That gaze was like a scary hook that scraped the bones, making people shudder. Wei Wei Bai clenched her hands. The novel stopped at the scene of the female lead being hung up and whipped after being caught by the male lead. These days, even a Mary Sue novel had become a torturous novel. And it was torturous to the female lead. Wei Wei Bai didn't dare to move. Both sides were in a standoff. Finally, Gu Nonli took a step forward. Wei Wei Bai trembled, but there was nowhere to hide. When he finally squatted down, his blood-stained hand held her fingers. The nail polish on her hand was a light pink rose color. They were on the same plane all the time, all the time. Gu Nonli's hand slowly caressed her fingertips, then the tips of her fingers. Finally, his fingers slipped between her fingers. And then he grabbed her with all his strength. Bai Weiwei sucked in a breath of air. The pain made her cringe and want to break free from his fingers. But in the next second, the gun in his hand was pointed at her chest. The cold muzzle pressed against her warm flesh. His lips trembled as he said each word with hatred, "Do you even have a heart? Do you even have a heart to leave me like this? Do you really want us to turn against each other and kill each other?" She was too ruthless. It wasn't enough to kill him, but she still wanted to torture him with the attitude of an absolute victor. If she died, how could he live? How could he live? So many resentful and painful words were suppressed between his lips, but he couldn't say anything more. Tears suddenly welled up in his red eyes. This man completely collapsed. The despair and pain in his eyes leaked out. He had always been good at enduring silently, like a poisonous snake that hid all of its pain and suffering. But during this period of time, the possibility of her death completely tore him to pieces. Save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1506. Seeing that she was alive, his first feeling was not joy, but the pain of torture in his body, which leaked out in such a weak and aggrieved manner. He even felt that he was not a man. Strangling her to death and dying with her was better than almost kneeling in front of her and venting his pain in such a cowardly manner. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. His tears fell on her fingers. She seemed to feel that this feeling was unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Her eyes suddenly turned red, and this sudden heartache came from the depths of her heart. The system looked on coldly and saw a crack appear on the shield. It was silent for a while, but it still turned around and bought a super OK bandage with the money it had just received for the cup. Then it took the OK bandage and stuck it to the crack. Its hand trembled and it hesitated for about 3 seconds. It lowered its head helplessly and finally made up its mind to stick the bandage to the crack. Emotions leaked out and it was completely sealed. It could not make the host feel moved. Once she was moved, she would not live long. It was still waiting for her to live happily until she was 100 years old. The system touched the shield. Hang in there, you will be happy in the future. Wei Wei Bai looked at the gun in his hand. She suddenly touched the gun with one hand, and the gun was suddenly dismantled. She was worried that Gu Nanli would be too excited and accidentally fire the gun. Gu Nanli's pupils shrank. He thought that she was going to resist him. The sudden panic and madness made him explode. He threw away the gun parts in his hand and pinched her shoulders hard, almost breaking them. He was filled with ruthlessness. Do you still hate me? Hate me so much that you are not willing to come back even if you are alive. As he spoke, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. Wei Wei Bai was in pain from his kiss. She wanted to push him away and appease this man's emotions. After all, in this situation, Gu Nanli was no different from a lunatic. Even if she lost her memory, she would not be able to use it anymore. Gu Nanli was afraid that she would run away. Even if she could not escape from this place, he still did not feel safe. So he clasped the back of her neck and pressed her head against his shoulder regardless of her wishes. He was wearing a watch on his other wrist. A fine anesthetic needle emerged from beside the watch. Wei Wei Bai seemed to know what he was going to do. She reached out and pressed his chest, saying in a muffled voice, Gu Nanli, let me go, The needle was merciless and had already pierced into her neck blood vessels. Gu Nanli's tear-filled eyes were filled with ruthlessness and coldness. He didn't care about external pursuers, even if the airport exploded and the two of them died together. It's better than hopeless waiting and searching. Wei Wei Bai's eyes opened. How was she going to explain? This man didn't give her a chance to explain, bullshit. It was as if he had taken over the rhythm of the song. Her vision turned black, and her entire body suddenly went limp. Gu Nanli hugged her. His gaze was fixed on the white wall in front of him, and his eyes were trembling. He did not even dare to look at her, afraid that he would strangle her. Gu Nanli reached out and touched her hair with trembling hands. He gritted his teeth and said, if you want to leave in the future, kill me first. He had seen through her tricks. She was thinking of ways to torture and abuse him. If she wanted to kill him because of hatred, it would not matter. She treated this dog better than she did him. He would accept it. The people who came to pick up Gu Nanli soon arrived. Those who wanted to kill Gu Nanli were all subdued. Chapter 1507. Blair, that cripple, set him up to come to M country this time, and it was a blessing in disguise that he found Wei Wei Bai. So Gu Nanli was in a rare mood of peace, and even asked someone to send a gift to Blair's family to thank him. After returning by private jet, when CCE led a group of people to the airport to greet them, he saw Wei Wei Bai wrapped in a long trench coat in Gu Nanli's arms. His eyeballs were about to fall out. He even suspected that Gu Nonli had gone somewhere to find a woman to pretend to be Wei Wei Bai. How could a person survive in that situation? It was simply a miracle. Gu Nonli's face was frighteningly pale, but his hand holding Wei Wei Bai was very stable, and even had a kind of fierce strength that he would not let go even if he died. Cici was closer to him, and could feel Gu Nonli's cold gaze. It was as if anyone would come up and steal his woman. When they returned home, a fat dog ran over. It was Wei Wei Bai's husky. Gu Nonli did not even look at it. He kicked the husky away and strode in. He put Wei Wei Bai on the bed. His hands were numb, but he did not dare to let go of her all the way. After putting her down, Gu Nonli sat aside and watched in a daze. It was getting dark, and the effect of the anesthetic began to wear off. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes with a headache. In the darkness, it seemed that someone was staring at her. She turned her head and saw Gu Nonli lying on the bed, looking at her with a very calm expression. It seemed that all the intense pain had been suppressed, leaving only tired indifference. When Gu Nonli saw that she was awake, he picked up a cup of warm water, supported the back of her head with one hand, and raised her face to feed her water. His movements were natural and intimate, as if they had never been separated. There was no hatred between them. Gu Nonli said softly, "Do you still feel uncomfortable?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with doubt. She looked at him for a while before gently shaking her head. Gu Nonli put down the cup and moved away from her. He sat on the edge of the bed and said softly, "How did you survive after you fell into the sea?" Wei Wei Bai was at a loss for a moment before she said, "I don't know. I was hit by the waves and was saved by a passerby." Gu Nonli's eyes were deep, but he didn't say whether he believed it or not. "I've seen your wound. It's recovering very well." Wei Wei Bai knew that he was referring to the gunshot wound in her abdomen. The system had created a bottle of medicinal plaster for the system to use. The system only used that thing to clean small wounds, but it was very effective for humans to recover very quickly. And because the system had its own resources, it didn't need money at all. It was just that he couldn't use it too much. Wei Wei Bai thought about how she had been fighting to the death with him before. Now, it was not appropriate for her to hug his leg and call him father. She could only look at him indifferently and didn't say anything. Gu Nonli didn't care about her attitude. He had endured all this time. Wei Wei Bai was back. What else could he not endure? His voice became gentler. "Do you still hate me?" Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. A complicated expression flashed across her face. It was too late to pretend to have amnesia now. Gu Nonli wasn't a fool. It would be strange if he believed her if she pretended to have amnesia first. So she could only brace herself and continue to face him. Seeing that she didn't say anything, Gu Nonli's face darkened. He looked down at his hands helplessly. They seemed to be covered in blood. Then, his voice became weak. "I just want to live." At that time, he was still young. After living in that dark hell for so many years, he had never felt any kindness or warmth. So his worldview was crooked. He didn't care about anyone. Chapter 1508. Revenge was to kill all of them. He didn't feel that he was in the wrong because no one told him what was right and what was wrong. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment. She thought that if she was caught by him, she would be beaten up badly. But why did this guy look like he was about to cry? This fragile look really made her feel like a mother. Gu Nali slowly stroked her hand and slowly found the buttons on her shirt. She gently unbuttoned them. "I didn't do it on purpose, Wei Wei. They hit me and wanted to kill me. I didn't know that they were your parents. I really didn't know." Actually, he knew. but he needed to verify it later. Wei Wei Bai couldn't bear to see it. She suddenly asked softly, "Didn't you hate me and want to take revenge on me?" Gu Nanli raised her head and said through gritted teeth, "When will I ever take revenge on you? I can't wait to treat you like the apple of my eye. You ingrate, tell me what I've done to you during this period of time. If you die, I can't wait to die with you. Is this how I hate you?" He suddenly tore open her clothes. Wei Wei Bai was shocked and wanted to get up, but he had already pressed her down with one hand. The look in his eyes changed from fragile to a terrifying wolf. Gu Nanli said fiercely, "I was so young back then. How could I have planned such a terrible case? Gu Buddha's death was not my fault." Wei Wei Bai's eyes turned cold. "But back then," Gu Nanli interrupted her fiercely. "Back then what? How old were you back then? You wanted to convict me based on Bai Mu's words. How could I have done so many things at such a young age?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes showed hesitation. Gu Nanli didn't give her a chance to think. "Think about it. Back then, we were swapped by Gu Buddha. He had the heart to betray us from the start. Later on, when he betrayed Bai Qi, I did do something wrong. I added fuel to the fire, but I was never the mastermind." Every word he said seemed to be trying to clear his name. But when he thought about it, it was true. Because he was still young, it was impossible for him to have so many vicious schemes. The wavering in Wei Wei Bai's eyes became even more obvious. Gu Nanli was already on the bed. He slowly pulled open her clothes and gently kissed the corner of her lips. He kept saying softly, "Wei Wei, I'm a victim. I've never had a good life. Gu Buddha didn't give me any food to eat and locked me in a small dark cupboard for an entire day. When I grew up, I went to see a psychologist for a long time, so I'm not afraid of the dark." He sounded so pitiful. Wei Wei Bai's eyes began to change. Her voice trembled. "They abused you." Gu Nanli's eyes reddened. "Don't you know that I'm afraid of needles? Because every time Gu Buddha was unhappy, he would stab me with a needle. It was very painful." This sentence was very painful, with a trembling voice at the end. Those with a bit of conscience felt their hearts ache when they heard this. Gu Nanli saw the pity in Wei Wei Bai's eyes turn into hatred. A trace of a victorious smile flashed across his heart. Yes, those abuses were real. He was sincerely grateful for those real experiences of abuse. He could make her pity him and love him. Gu Nanli struck while the iron was hot. He kept talking about how miserable his childhood was. Wei Wei Bai felt that Gu Buddha was worse than a beast. He should go to hell even if he died. "And your mother," it was Gu Buddha who personally ordered her to be killed. "How could I kill my own mother?" As long as Gu Nanli was given a chance, even the dead could be brought back to life. Every lie was the truth. Slash. Chapter 1509. As soon as Gu Nanli was rescued, she started to stir up trouble. "Take it away. Don't let me see the needle." He pulled off the drip and threw it away. Actually, he only felt uncomfortable when he saw the needle, but as long as Wei Wei Bai was present, he would pretend to be scared. Wei Wei Bai pressed his wrist, which was bleeding. She said coldly, "Stop fooling around. You have to take care of your body." Gu Nanli looked at her blankly, then he looked away. "Don't worry about me. It's good that my life is short, so you don't have to face me." Wei Wei Bai, damn it, I'm too lazy to act up, but he's already panting. If it wasn't for the fact that this place was surrounded like an iron bucket, she really wanted to kick him to death. Actually, she also felt that this was too easy to pass. Gu Nanli didn't even ask her how she survived. He also didn't ask about her escape. But pretending to be weak, pitiful, and desperate was addictive. Wei Wei Bai couldn't express her dislike too obviously. After all, she loved him so much in the previous strategy. Now, she couldn't just say that she didn't love him anymore. She had to put on an act to show that she still loved him. Otherwise, it would be easy for Gu Nonli to kill her when she was truly desperate. Look at him, he was so bad at a young age. When he grew up, he was even worse. If she didn't have the system's information, even she would be fooled by him. In any case, he would never admit that he planned to kill Gu Buddha's family and Bai Chi's wife. And he used his childhood experience of being abused to act coquettishly with her. She wasn't a little white flower in this world. In the end, he became a little white flower. Being around a pretentious little white flower was really hopeless. Wei Wei Bai suddenly understood the system. In those worlds, it looked at her hopelessly. Thinking of the calm, wise, and ruthless Gu Nonli in the beginning, turned into a retard. She wondered if she had been too harsh on him and made him stupid. When Wei Wei Bai thought that she would have to spend the rest of her life with this idiot, she suddenly felt that life was really hopeless. Would he be smart enough to come back if he was a little sweeter? Wei Wei Bai held the bowl patiently. Time to take your medicine, Ji. Darling Gu. He almost scolded Zhang Xian for being a retard, but fortunately, he held himself back. Gu Nonli's gaze was extremely deep, but it was just a fleeting illusion. He quickly lay back down. I'm not eating anymore. Anyway, I'll be a pot of medicine in the future. You'll definitely be annoyed when you see me. Wei Wei Bai held the bowl and looked at him coldly. Gu Nonli was very tolerant. He still looked miserable and weak. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, can we stuff the bowl into his mouth and choke him to death? The system was haggling with the trash collector over the price of the small stool. It said perfunctorily, all right, there's no need for a strategy. Treat him well. Who knows when this guy will die? It just didn't want to see the two of them running around. It would get tired too. Moreover, it still wanted to fight 300 rounds with the trash collector. How could its yellow rosewood stool be sold for 10 days of life? How could it be worthy of its feelings of sitting there for so long? Wei Wei Bai still believed in the system. It turned out that Gu Nonli was a short-lived ghost. She looked at him with pity. This guy's life was short because of kidney deficiency. She didn't think much of it. She drank a mouthful of medicine and reached out to pinch Gu Nonli's chin. She lowered her head and kissed him, passing the medicine over. Before Gu Nonli could react, she took another mouthful of medicine and kissed him again. The. Chapter 15:10. She kissed him one bite at a time. She fed him. Gu Nonli was stunned for a long time. He couldn't believe what she was doing. After Wei Wei Bai finished feeding him the medicine, she lowered her thick eyelashes. There was a trace of tenderness in her eyes. Don't make me worry. Get better soon. Gu Nonli's idiotic look disappeared. He looked at her silently for a long time before saying, kiss me again. Wei Wei Bai didn't hesitate and kissed him again. Gu Nonli suddenly pulled her back and pressed her onto the bed. He kissed her and their breaths intertwined. He was about to lose control. Wei Wei Bai slapped his face. Don't be agitated. You have weak kidneys. I don't want to see you vomit blood halfway. Gu Nonli's body stiffened. This was a disgrace. And it wasn't just once. He only knew that his foundation was indeed too weak. The doctor had warned him many times that he wouldn't live long if he kept tormenting himself like this. Previously, he didn't see any hope. It didn't matter whether he lived or died. Now he couldn't. He wanted to live, and because of Bai Weiwei, he had hoped to live. Gu Nonli looked at her lying beside him. Her fair face was flushed, and her hair was spread all over the pillow. She was looking at him with a slightly cold but gentle gaze. The darkness in his heart and the dispirited feeling of insecurity disappeared under her gaze. He lowered his head and kissed her eyelashes, her eyes, and her cheeks. But he stopped in the end. He was afraid that he would lose control. Then, Gu Nonli let go of her and said in a hoarse voice, "Weiwei, I'll take good care of myself. Stay by my side and supervise me, okay?" He didn't care much about his career. It was fine as long as he could live. He just wanted to love her. In the past, he didn't know what a family was. But her existence made him feel that it was a cold and empty house. It was just a place to sleep. It would be warm and heartwarming, and it would make people reluctant to leave. Weiwei Bai smiled. "If I want to leave, will you let me?" Gu Nonli's fingers tightened around her arm. His voice was gentle as he said, "I won't be able to lead a good life without you." Weiwei Bai was stunned. She did not expect his answer to be this. Gu Nonli's expression was gentle but sad. "I'm not doing well, Weiwei." This sentence was practically a plea. It was as if he had found her weakness. She didn't like it when he was too strong, so he could put himself in the dust and wait for her to pity him. How could a man go from being so strong and cold to being so ruthless to himself? He was simply showing his most vulnerable, most helpless, and most unpresentable side. He laid it out for her. She could easily hurt him. Gu Nonli's face was pale and haggard. "Look at me. I won't live for long. I can't take it anymore after so many years. You can accompany me as if you're accompanying a pitiful patient who's about to die. Give him some sympathy and let him lead a better life, okay?" Weiwei Bai felt that she couldn't take it anymore. This method was too high-end. This pitiful act. This little white flower was pitiful. This little look was desolate. It was dozens of levels higher than the little white flower model. Weiwei Bai felt that she had to learn from him. Even if she had no feelings and was calm. She couldn't withstand the emergence of guilt. What was with this damned feeling? Weiwei Bai asked the system, "Gu Nonli won't live long, right? If his kidneys were weak, the man would be ashamed to death. His life would definitely not be long." The system asked carefully, "What if he has a long life?" Chapter 1511. Weiwei Bai pondered, "Is there anything that can modify memories? Let's just delete Gu Nonli's memory with one click. If he lives to 100 years old, I'll have to accompany him for 100 years. That's too long." It seemed like she couldn't apply for a lifetime in the future. After all, she couldn't leave even if she succeeded. She still had to face this man for the rest of her life. She was exhausted. The system refused to give up on the life value. Memory modification items were too expensive. It definitely wouldn't waste this money. It immediately said, "He's short-lived. Really, it's impossible for him to live to 100 years old. At most 70 or 80 years. After all, with Weiwei Bai, the parasite that ate his luck, there would only be about 80 years left. After all, the emotional fragments in the plane were definitely not as good as Yushuan's. No matter how much Weiwei Bai messed around, she couldn't affect his foundation. Weiwei Bai, really? The system quickly promised, "If you're worried, you can pester him to bed every day. He's already very weak. If you pester him, he might die." It was like a weak scholar meeting a female ghost. After one round of sex, he would die. This was caused by a weak foundation. Weiwei Bai was shocked, only the system can say such a shameless idea. But thinking about it carefully, it made sense. So the way Bike stared at Gu Nonly changed. She looked at his weak body and his pale face. One look and she knew that he was a short-lived ghost. If she pestered him a few more times, one day he would die in bed. Gu Nonly felt that her eyes seemed to be burning with a dazzling flame, bright as snow. Then she turned the tables and pushed him directly onto the bed, sitting on his stomach. Just like a man-eating demon, her beautiful nails slowly scratched his sensitive areas. "Do you want me?" Gu Nonly's body couldn't help but tremble with excitement. His breathing became heavy, and his eyes were full of anger. The pitiful look just now was all gone. He moved quickly and grabbed her hand that was making trouble for him. His eyes were red as he said, "Yes." Wei Bai planned to pester him and make him die young. So she was just about to undo his clothes. Gu Nonly was stunned for a moment and said hesitantly, "But it might not be possible now." Wei Bai, Gu Nonly was worried that she wouldn't understand. "It's just a little impotent, Wei Bai, how can a man say something like that? Gu Nonly's skin is as thick as heaven and earth." Gu Nonly saw her shocked expression. "If you really want it, I can help you with my hands. When I'm better in a few days, I promise I'll be able to carry you." His words were getting dirtier and dirtier. "Shut up, you impotent man." Wei Bai pretended to be magnanimous. "Next time then. After all, you're not in good health." Gu Nonly smiled, the gentleness in his eyes could even drip water. But in his dark heart, he was secretly guessing her motive. She was suddenly so proactive. She must be suspecting that he was faking his illness. So even if he wanted to pounce on her, he had to control himself and let her know that his body was really weak. Wei Bai got off the bed, but Gu Nonly suddenly grabbed her clothes. "Where are you going?" Wei Bai froze in her tracks. She wanted to play games and read novels. After all, she couldn't get any favorability points. It was very boring for her to stay here. Of course, she couldn't say it out loud. She could only say, "I won't disturb you. You can have a good rest. Gu Nonly, without you, I can't sleep." Wei Bai, she felt that she was carrying a huge burden. Is at https://www.sashu.com//. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.